A $4 million hypercar. 8 days. 14 specialists flown in from around the world, with cutting-edge equipment, international support teams, and decades of combined expertise. And not one of them could answer the simplest question: why won't it start? Olivia Kensington built her automotive empire from nothing. She had survived bankruptcy scares, industry scandals, and competitors who spent years waiting for her to fail. But she had never, not once, been defeated by a machine, until that morning. And the only person who could save her wasn't a world-renowned engineer or a factory specialist. He was a small-town mechanic who showed up to deliver spare parts. Hit like, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. Then stay until the end, because this is one you won't want to miss. The Kensington Automotive Group's service facility on the edge of the city did not look like a place where things went wrong. It looked like a place where things were made right, expensively, deliberately, with the kind of controlled precision that justified the fees on the invoices. The building was all glass and brushed steel, the floors a pale composite that reflected the overhead lighting in smooth, unbroken sheets. The air smelled faintly of climate control and synthetic leather, with something underneath it, something chemical and exact, the smell of machines that cost more than most people's houses. The hypercar sat in the center bay. It had been there for 8 days. Under its dust cover, a fitted charcoal gray wrap embroidered with the dealership's crest, the car crouched like something that had decided, for reasons of its own, to simply stop cooperating. It was a Valerian Apex, one of 11 produced in a special commission run for clients whose names appeared on very short lists. $4.2 million at base configuration. Olivia Kensington's version had cost considerably more because Olivia Kensington did not buy base configurations. The car had been delivered 11 months ago. For 10 of those months, it had performed exactly as promised. A machine so precisely engineered that driving it felt less like operating a vehicle and more like being granted temporary access to something that normally existed only in physics equations. Then, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, Olivia had pressed the start button and nothing had happened. Not a click, not a stutter, not a dashboard warning or a diagnostic light. Just silence and the faint reflection of her own face in the instrument cluster. Olivia Kensington was 53 years old and had spent 26 of those years building something most people assumed had been handed to her. It had not been handed to her. She had started with one used car lot in a mid-sized city, a rented office above a dry cleaner, and a loan that had kept her awake more nights than she could count. The Kensington Automotive Group now operated 14 luxury dealerships across 4 states, held exclusive regional distribution rights for 3 European manufacturers, and employed just under 800 people, most of whom she knew by first name. She had a reputation for 2 things: an almost forensic memory for detail, and a very low tolerance for excuses. She was standing in the service bay on the morning of day 8 when Marcus Hale, her head of operations, brought her the overnight report. Marcus was 50, careful with words, and had worked for Olivia long enough to know exactly how to deliver news she did not want to hear. He stood at the edge of the bay with his tablet and waited until she turned around. "Tell me," she said. "The team from Cologne finished their second sweep last night." He paused. "They found nothing." Nothing. The vehicle's diagnostic systems show no fault codes, no anomalies in the ECU, no irregularities in the power delivery network, no issues with the high-voltage battery management system. According to every instrument they brought, the car is in perfect operational condition. "And yet," Olivia said. "And yet," Marcus agreed. She looked at the covered car for a moment, then she turned back to him. "What about the specialist from Tokyo?" He confirmed the Cologne team's assessment. He said, and I'm quoting here, that in his 22 years of working with high-performance vehicles, he has never encountered a diagnostic result this clean on a non-functional machine. Meaning he has no idea either. Marcus said nothing, which was answer enough. Olivia walked to the nearest stool. The service bays were kept sparse, functional, and sat down. Not because she was tired, because she was thinking, and when Olivia Kensington was thinking hard, she preferred to be still. She folded her hands and stared at the dust cover. The costs had become difficult to talk about without a pause before answering. 8 days of around-the-clock specialist labor, international travel, equipment freight, software licensing, 2 temporary service crews from European headquarters, hotel blocks for 14 visiting technicians, and the indirect cost of having the centerpiece of the collection sitting inert in the middle of a bay that was otherwise generating zero revenue. She had stopped asking for the running total after day 5. "I want a meeting at 9, she said. Everyone. The meeting was held in the facility's upper conference room, which had a glass floor panel in the center through which the service bays were visible below. The irony was not lost on anyone that the covered Valerian apex was directly visible through the panel. 11 people sat around the table. 5 were Kensington staff. 6 were visiting specialists. Olivia stood at the head. She did not use slides or bring notes. "I'm going to ask each of you a single question," she said, "and I'd like a direct answer, not a technical summary, not a list of what you've ruled out. A direct answer." She looked at the nearest specialist, a compact, efficient-looking man named Dr. Friedrich Baum from the Cologne Engineering Group. "Do you know what is wrong with this car?" Baum straightened slightly. "We have been able to confirm that the vehicle's primary and secondary systems are operating within their designed parameters." "That's not what I asked." A silence. "No," Baum said. "We do not know what is wrong with it." She moved to the next, a tall woman named Aiko Tanaka, the Tokyo consultant. "Do you know what is wrong with this car?" Tanaka looked at the table for a fraction of a second. "No." She went around the room. The answers were all variations of no, some delivered with more qualifications than others, one with a fairly exhaustive list of what had been eliminated. She listened to each one without interrupting. When she got back to her seat at the head of the table, she sat down, and the room was quiet in a way that felt like held breath. "This car," Olivia said, "cost more than some people spend in a lifetime. The company that built it employs over 4,000 engineers and has won 3 consecutive world records for production vehicle performance. Every person in this room is regarded as among the best in their field." She paused. "And we have collectively spent 8 days, and a number I'm not going to say aloud, achieving precisely nothing." Nobody spoke. "Here is where we are," she continued. "I have been patient. I have extended every courtesy, provided every resource, and accepted every reasonable delay. But I'm running a business, not a research program. And at some point the question becomes, not can this be fixed, but whether we are the right people to fix it." She looked at Marcus. "I want options on my desk by end of day. All of them, including ones I won't like." She stood, and the meeting was over. The mood in the service bay for the rest of the morning was quiet in a particular way. Not peaceful, but compressed. The kind of quiet that accumulates when people are working hard to look like they're not worried. The German team had set up a secondary diagnostic workstation near the rear wall, connected to the car by a nest of cables that disappeared under the dust cover. Dr. Baum was there, tablet in hand, reviewing data he had already reviewed multiple times. He had the focused expression of someone who believed the answer was in the numbers and was simply a matter of finding the right number. Aiko Tanaka had positioned herself at the front of the car. She was not consulting any equipment. She was just looking at the covered shape of it, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. 2 members of her team were near the door having a conversation in Japanese that the Kensington staff could not follow and assumed was not good news. 3 of Olivia's own technicians, Ryan, Derek, and a young woman named Carla, who had been with the company for 14 months and had not yet developed the habit of hiding what she was thinking, were at the side workbench. Ryan was making coffee. Derek was staring at a schematic on his laptop. Carla was watching the room. "You think she's going to send it back to the factory?" Carla said quietly. Ryan stirred his coffee. "Probably. That's like a 3-month process minimum." "I know." "And the cost to ship it—" "I know," Ryan said again, with slightly more emphasis. Carla looked at the covered car. 8 days and we've got nothing. That's embarrassing." Derek looked up from his laptop. "We've ruled out a lot." "Ruling out things isn't fixing it." "It's part of fixing it." "Not when you run out of things to rule out," Carla said. Derek looked back at his laptop. He didn't have an answer for that. The delivery truck from Elmwood Auto Parts arrived at 11:45, 20 minutes late, which was not unusual for midweek suburban routes. It was a white panel truck with a dent in the front bumper and the company logo sun-faded from years of highway exposure. The driver had a delivery for the parts receiving dock on the building's east side. A consignment of high-tolerance filters and 2 specialty toolkits that one of the service managers had ordered for a separate job. The driver was Nathan Brooks. He was 34, medium height, the kind of build that came from actual physical work rather than a gym. His hands were clean. He was particular about that. But there were lines in his knuckles that no amount of washing would fully remove, the permanent evidence of years in close contact with metal and grease. He wore dark work pants, a gray thermal shirt with a faded company logo, and carried a clipboard with the delivery manifest. He backed the truck in without drama, confirmed the manifest with the receiving clerk, and was signing off when he noticed the service bay doors were open. Nathan Brooks had been working with cars since he was 15, when his uncle had let him take apart an engine in the backyard just to see if they could put it back together. They had. Barely. But that experience, the specific pleasure of understanding why a thing worked the way it worked, had never left him. He ran a small shop in Elmwood, 40 minutes east of the city, that handled everything from routine maintenance to the kind of complex mechanical problems that other shops turned away. His client list was mostly locals. He wasn't famous for it. He just did it. He glanced through the open bay doors, not nosily. He had no particular reason to go in. But the covered shape of the car in the center bay caught his attention the way a partially solved problem catches a certain kind of mind. It wasn't the size or the obvious value of the thing. It was the positioning, the way the equipment was arranged around it, the number of people in the space, and the specific quality of how they were standing. He'd seen that quality before. It was the posture of people who had run out of answers and were trying not to show it. He finished signing the manifest, handed the clipboard back to the clerk, and was walking back toward his truck when he stopped. "Excuse me," he said to the clerk, a young man named Paul, who looked up from his desk with mild surprise. "What's the car?" Paul glanced toward the bay. "Valerian Apex, custom build." "When did it come in?" Paul hesitated, then apparently decided there was no reason not to answer. 8 days ago. Doesn't start." Nathan nodded slowly. "Any chance I could take a closer look?" Paul laughed, not unkindly. "Those are the Cologne team in there and the Japanese consultant. They've been at it since last week. I'm not going to touch anything," Nathan said. "I just want to see it." Paul looked at him for a moment, then he shrugged. I can't exactly stop you from walking through an open door. Just don't get in anyone's way." Nathan walked in quietly. Nobody looked up. The German team was absorbed in their workstation. Tanaka was still at the front of the car. Carla noticed him first, a stranger in work clothes who didn't belong to any of the visiting teams, and watched him with a slight frown but said nothing. Ryan and Derek didn't look up. Nathan stood near the entrance for a moment, getting a feel for the space. He looked at the equipment arrangement first, then the cable runs, then the position of the car relative to the bay's central alignment markers. Then he walked, slowly, around the perimeter of the bay, not approaching the car directly, just looking at the setup. He stopped near the rear. There was a gap in the dust cover, a small imperfection in the way it had been refitted after the last removal, perhaps a 1/4 inch at the lower edge of the passenger rear quarter. Through the gap, if you were at the right angle and the light was right, you could see a portion of the car's lower panel and a section of the engine compartment access area. Nathan crouched down. He looked for maybe 40 seconds. Then he straightened up slowly. He stood there for a moment. "Excuse me," he said. The room didn't respond exactly, but Carla turned toward him. Dr. Baum glanced up from his workstation. Tanaka turned her head slightly. "Has anyone looked at the secondary power distribution interface on the driver's side? The physical connector housing, not the digital trace." Baum frowned. "Who are you?" "I'm the parts delivery driver," Nathan said. "Has anyone looked at that connector?" There was a silence that had several different textures in it. Baum's was impatient. Tanaka's was unreadable. Carla's was something closer to careful. "The vehicle's entire electrical architecture has been mapped twice," Baum said. "Every connector, every junction point, every circuit pathway. The diagnostic systems would detect any fault in the power distribution network." "The diagnostic systems measure continuity and resistance," Nathan said. "They won't catch a dimensional fault in the connector housing itself if the fault isn't producing a measurable electrical change." Baum stared at him. "I noticed through the cover that the lower panel gap near the secondary distribution access point has a slight compression inconsistency," Nathan continued. It might be nothing, but on a limited production run with custom housing specs, a dimensional variation in the physical connector body. Sir, Baum said, with the particular patience of a man who has decided to be polite about something that is wasting his time, the Valerian Apex's power distribution architecture has been analyzed by the manufacturer's own engineering team using equipment that can detect faults at the micron level. The diagnostic coverage is complete. With respect, the issue you're describing is not something a visual observation through a dust cover could identify. I didn't identify it, Nathan said. I said it might be worth looking at. We've looked at everything, Baum said. That's the problem. Nathan nodded. He didn't look offended. He looked like a man thinking about something. Who do I talk to about getting permission for a closer look? He asked. Carla found Marcus Hale. She didn't know exactly why she did it. Professional instinct, perhaps, or the specific way that the delivery driver had asked his question, without ego, without performance. Just a straightforward expression of something he'd noticed. In 14 months at Kensington, she had developed a working sense of the difference between people who sounded like they knew things and people who actually knew things. The delivery driver sounded like the second kind. Whether that meant anything or not, she figured Marcus could decide. Marcus listened to her explanation with his tablet under his arm. Then he looked through the bay doors at the man in the work clothes, who was standing near the front of the covered car now, not touching anything, just looking at it. A parts delivery driver, Marcus said. He noticed something through the gap in the cover, Carla said. He was specific about it. The secondary power distribution interface on the driver's side, the physical connector housing. Baum's team mapped the full electrical architecture. I know. He said the diagnostic systems measure continuity and resistance. He said they might not catch a dimensional fault in the housing if it's not producing a measurable electrical change. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Is that technically accurate? Carla hesitated. I think it might be. Marcus looked at the covered car, then at the German team, then back at the man near the car. What's his name? He said Nathan Brooks. He runs a shop in Elmwood. Elmwood. Marcus repeated the town with the neutral inflection of a man who was not dismissing it exactly, but was registering that it was 40 minutes east of the city and not widely known for producing automotive engineering expertise. He crossed the bay. Mr. Brooks? He said. Nathan turned. My name is Marcus Hale, Operations Director. Carla tells me you've noticed something. I noticed something worth asking about, Nathan said. I don't know if it's the problem. What would you need to find out? A flashlight and an electrical meter. I wouldn't need to remove anything. Marcus studied him. Nathan met the look without aggression or anxiety. He was just waiting. Give me 5 minutes, Marcus said. The 5 minutes turned into 20 because Marcus had to explain the situation to Olivia, and Olivia had questions. Not hostile ones. They were the direct, precise questions of someone assessing a risk. What was his background? What specifically had he observed? What was the theoretical basis for his hypothesis? Marcus answered what he could and admitted what he didn't know. He runs a repair shop in Elmwood, Olivia said. She was at her desk, looking at Marcus. Yes. And his argument is that a physical dimensional fault in the connector housing could persist undetected through complete diagnostic mapping? His argument is that it's worth checking. He didn't claim to know the answer. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised Marcus slightly. At least he's honest about that. She stood. I want to be in the bay when he does it. The bay had more people in it by the time Olivia came down. Word had traveled through the facility the way bad news and strange developments always did, quickly and with embellishment. There were now approximately 20 people occupying the edges of the space, staff and specialists alike, positioned with the careful casualness of people who were there for operational reasons and not because they were curious. Nobody was admitting to curiosity. Nathan was standing beside the covered car. Marcus had given him a decent flashlight and a calibrated digital multimeter. He had his own pen and a worn notepad in his shirt pocket that he'd pulled from the truck. Olivia crossed the bay and stopped in front of him. Marcus tells me you think there's something in the connector housing, she said. I think there might be, Nathan said. I could be wrong. How long will you need? Not long, a few minutes to get a look. If I find something, a little longer to confirm it. Olivia studied him for a moment, the same way she'd studied every specialist who'd walked through her door in the past 8 days. There was a difference, though, in what she was looking for. With the others, she'd been assessing credentials, the weight of their expertise, the authority of their track record. With Nathan, she wasn't sure what she was assessing, something more instinctive. Something about the way he stood with the flashlight hanging loose in his hand, not performing confidence, not trying to impress her. He just looked like a man who was about to look at a car. "Go ahead," she said. Champed. The dust cover came off. This was the first time in 3 days it had been removed. The specialists had been working with access panels and cable connections rather than a full exposure. When the charcoal gray wrap lifted away, the car underneath was briefly startling in the way beautiful things sometimes are when you encounter them after a delay. The Valerian Apex's exterior was a deep midnight blue that shifted slightly toward violet in the overhead light, with a body profile so aggressively sculpted that it seemed to exist in its own aerodynamic logic, as if it had been shaped by wind rather than designed. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Nathan moved to the driver's side. He didn't go to the cockpit. He went to the lower rear quarter, crouched down, and directed the flashlight at the panel beneath the rear access door. He looked for a while, not frantically, deliberately, moving the flashlight in small increments. Then he shifted to a slightly different angle, adjusting the light. Carla was watching from the side bench. She couldn't see what he was looking at, but she could see the quality of his attention, the specific focused stillness of it. And it looked different from the way the specialists had examined the car. The specialists had looked at systems. Nathan was looking at something more particular. He opened the multimeter, set the range, connected the probes to 2 points she couldn't identify from across the bay. Read the display. Read it again, repositioning one probe slightly. He wrote something in his notepad. He stood up and walked around to the front of the car, opened the hood release, not the electronic one, the manual secondary, and used the flashlight inside the engine compartment. He was in there for perhaps 2 minutes. He emerged, looked at his notepad, and looked at the car. The bay was very quiet. He walked back to the driver's side lower panel, crouched again. This time he reached in, just his hand, no tools. And there was a sound that was very small, the kind of sound that registered more as a change in air pressure than as an actual noise. A soft, dry click. Nathan stood up. "Okay," he said. He turned to the room, to Olivia, to the assembled specialists, to the 20-odd people ranged along the walls. "The problem is in the secondary power distribution interface, the physical connector housing. There's a dimensional variance in the connector body's locking tab. It's approximately 0.5 millimeter short of spec on the contact side. In normal conditions, the connector seats fully and maintains contact. But the Valerian Apex's active thermal management system causes localized heat cycling in that section of the bay, and over time, with repeated thermal expansion and contraction, the underspec locking tab allows the connector to migrate incrementally out of full engagement. It's still making contact, but the contact pressure is below the threshold. The vehicle's management system needs to authorize the ignition sequence." He paused. "The reason the diagnostics didn't find it is that the connector is still registering continuity. It's still technically connected. The fault isn't in the circuit, it's in the mechanical retention of the connector. The diagnostic systems test electrical function. They don't test the physical seating pressure of the connector body against the socket." Dr. Baum had his tablet held against his chest. His expression was the expression of a man experiencing something he would need time to process. "The correction is simple," Nathan said. "The housing needs a shim at the locking tab to restore the designed contact pressure. Alternatively, the housing can be replaced entirely with a correct spec part. Either way, it's a 10-minute fix once you have the right piece." He looked at Olivia. "Do you want me to do it, or would you prefer someone else to take it from here?" Olivia looked at him for a moment. "Do it," she said. Nathan went back to his truck and came back with a small fitted case that he carried in one hand. He set it on the side bench, opened it, and selected from it with the same unhurried precision he'd applied to everything else. He took a shim from a sorted tray, checked its dimensions against his notepad, and replaced it with a slightly different one. He also pulled out a contact cleaner and a small precision applicator. He went back to the driver's side panel. The work itself took 11 minutes. It would have taken 10, but he spent an extra minute cleaning the contact surface before fitting the shim, which was, as Carla would later tell Ryan, the part that stuck with her most. Not the diagnosis, not the confidence. The fact that he cleaned the surface even when it probably wasn't strictly necessary, because it was the right way to do it. When he was done, he closed the panel and stood up. He looked at Olivia. "Do you want to try it?" he asked. Olivia walked to the driver's side door, opened it, and sat down. The cockpit was tight and precise, built for function over comfort in the way that truly extreme machines sometimes were. She wrapped her hands around the wheel. She pressed the start button. The engine came to life. Not with drama. It wasn't that kind of machine. The Valerian Apex's power unit started with a smooth, immediate authority, a deep thrumming that you felt in the seat before you heard it, the sound of 4.5 liters of precisely built mechanical intent, completing its cycle exactly as designed. The instrument cluster lit. The systems populated their displays. The car breathed. The bay was absolutely silent except for the engine. Then Carla exhaled, and the silence broke. Olivia sat in the car for a moment after the engine settled. She was not a sentimental person and had not cried in a professional context in years. She did not cry now, but she sat there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, both hands on the wheel, looking at the instrument cluster that had been dark for 8 days, and let herself feel the thing that she usually dealt with by moving immediately to the next problem. Then she got out of the car. Nathan was packing his case. He moved the same way he did everything, without hurry, without performance, putting each tool back in its place with the automatic care of someone for whom that was just how things were done. "Mr. Brooks," Olivia said. He looked up. She didn't know exactly what she had expected him to look like in this moment. Satisfied, perhaps, or the particular expression of vindication, the quiet version of "I told you so" that she had seen on the faces of people who had been doubted and proven right. It was a very human expression, and she understood it. Nathan just looked attentive, like she was about to say something and he was waiting to hear what it was. "Thank you," she said. He closed the case. "You're welcome." She looked at him for a moment. "How much?" she asked. He thought about it, not performing humility, actually thinking about it. "The shim was $18, he said, "and I'm about 2 hours behind on deliveries. If you could square that with Elmwood Auto Parts so I don't get docked, that'd cover it." In the 22 years since Olivia Kensington had started her first dealership, she had paid a great many invoices for a great many services. She had never, not once, been asked to square a delivery delay with a parts supplier as the full compensation for solving a $4 million problem. "I'll do that," she said, "and I'll need your number." Nathan reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a card. It was plain, printed on stock paper, not designed, with his name and a phone number and the name of his shop. He held it out. Olivia took it. He picked up his case, gave the car one last look. Not the look of ownership or pride, just the look of a man confirming that a thing was working correctly, and walked toward the bay doors. At the doors, he stopped and turned back. "For what it's worth," he said, "the fault would have shown up eventually on its own. The thermal cycling would have moved the connector enough that it would have dropped completely out of contact and given you a hard fault code. Probably another 2 or 3 weeks. He paused. "You would have found it." "We wouldn't have found it for another 2 or 3 weeks, Olivia said. "No," Nathan agreed. "Probably not." He walked out. The bay was quiet for a moment. Then, gradually, people began to move. Dr. Baum went back to his workstation, though he stood there looking at his data with a different quality of attention than he'd had before. Tanaka crossed the bay and crouched at the driver's side lower panel, examining the correction without touching it, her face in the neutral expression of someone integrating new information. Ryan poured the last of the coffee and gave Carla a look that said several things without any of them being spoken. Carla looked at the doors through which Nathan had left. "He cleaned the contact surface," she said. "I saw," Ryan said. "Before he fitted the shim. He didn't have to do that." "I know." Carla picked up her coffee. "That's the part that gets me," she said. Outside, the delivery truck backed out of the lot. The morning was ordinary and clear. The car sat in the bay with its engine idling, warm and awake, running exactly as it had been built to run, waiting for nothing. The card sat on Olivia's desk for the rest of that day. It was not in a place of prominence. She had set it near the edge of the desk when she came upstairs after the bay cleared out, between a stack of vendor contracts and the corner of her monitor, and she had not moved it. It was an ordinary card, the kind printed at a copy shop rather than a design studio, with no logo, no tagline, nothing that suggested Nathan Brooks had ever thought about how he presented himself to the world. Just a name, a phone number, and the words Brooks Auto Repair, Elmwood. She picked it up twice that afternoon and put it back down both times without doing anything. Marcus found her at her desk at 4:30, which was when he usually brought the end-of-day operational summary. He set his tablet on the desk, glanced at the card, and said nothing about it. "The German team is leaving tomorrow morning," Olivia said. "Make sure the hotel accounts are settled and the freight arrangements for their equipment are confirmed." "Already handled," Marcus said. "Tanaka is staying through Thursday. She asked if she could examine the connector assembly in more detail before she goes." "Tell her yes." Olivia paused. "Tell her she's welcome to document it." Marcus made a note. "The base staff want to know how to log today for the repair record." Log it as a mechanical fault in the secondary power distribution connector housing, corrected by external technician. She thought for a moment. "Nathan Brooks, Elmwood Auto Repair." Marcus typed it. "And the cost?" $18 for a shim, 2 hours of delivery delay compensation, which I've already sorted with Elmwood Auto Parts. She said this in the flat tone of someone reporting a fact, but Marcus knew her well enough to hear what was under it. Not embarrassment exactly, but the specific acknowledgement of an irony that was too large to ignore. He didn't comment on it. He moved to the next item. When he left, Olivia looked at the card again. She had a habit, when thinking about a decision, of stress testing the version of herself that wanted to do the opposite. She was considering calling Nathan Brooks. The version of herself that wanted to leave the card where it was argued, the problem was solved, the car was running, and the professional appropriate response was to move on. She had competent staff, she had established relationships with specialist consultants. She did not need to add a solo operator from a suburb to her network on the basis of one incident, however striking. She picked up the card. The version of herself that wanted to make the call had a simpler argument. She had spent 8 days and an amount of money she still wasn't saying out loud. And a man with a flashlight and an $18 shim had solved it in 11 minutes. Whether that was something to build on or just something to acknowledge and set aside, she needed to understand it better before she decided. She called. It rang 4 times. Then, "Brooks Auto." "Mr. Brooks, this is Olivia Kensington." A short pause. "Ms. Kensington." His voice was the same as it had been in the bay. Not warm exactly, but even. Unperformed. "Everything still running all right?" "Perfectly," she said. "That's not why I'm calling." She paused, which was unusual for her. She was not a pauser. "I'd like to meet with you, not about the car specifically, about a broader conversation." Another pause. "What kind of broader conversation?" "The kind that's better in person," she said. "Would you come to the facility on Friday? I'll have Marcus send you the details." A longer pause this time. She could hear faintly something mechanical in the background, a ratchet turning, the faint percussion of a shop. "I've got a fuel system job Friday morning," Nathan said. "I could do afternoon, 2 o'clock." 2 o'clock, Olivia said. "I'll see you then." She hung up and set the card back on the desk. This time in a different position, deliberately, in the center rather than the edge, in the way that people sometimes physically mark a decision they've made. The Valerian Apex left the service bay on Wednesday morning, driven by Olivia herself, through the facility's rear exit and onto the access road that curved north toward the highway interchange. She drove it for 40 minutes. Not a test, not an inspection, just driving. The car performed exactly as it had on every other occasion she had driven it. Precisely, immediately, with the slightly unnerving responsiveness of a machine that took your intentions seriously. She drove it back, returned it to the covered bay, and went upstairs to her 11 o'clock meeting without saying much to anyone about it. Carla, who had watched the car leave and come back from the service window, said to Ryan, she needed to know it was real. Ryan was eating a sandwich. "What's that?" "That it actually works. 8 days of it not working, and then one morning it starts, and someone you've never met drives away." You'd want to drive it yourself, too. Ryan considered this. I guess you would. The specialists are gone, Carla said. Tanaka's still here, but she's in the documents room. It's just us now, and the car running like nothing happened. She looked out the window. Feels strange. Strange how? She thought about it. Like we should have learned something from it, but I don't know if we did. Ryan finished his sandwich. Baum probably learned something. Baum went back to Cologne. Still. Carla looked at the covered car. I'm serious. We had 14 people in here for 8 days. We went through the entire vehicle twice. And Nathan Brooks comes in on a parts run and finds it in 20 minutes with a flashlight and a meter. She shook her head. I keep thinking about what he said, that the diagnostic systems test electrical function but not physical seating pressure. It's a gap in the test coverage. It's a gap that nobody on the Cologne team thought to look for, or the Tokyo consultant, or us. She paused. Why not? Ryan didn't answer right away. He folded his sandwich wrapper. Because we were looking at the problem the way the problem was supposed to look, he said finally. Diagnostic tools, fault codes, the system's framework, and he stopped. He looked at the car, Carla said. Yeah. They both looked at the covered car for a moment. He's coming back Friday, Carla said. Marcus told me. 2:00 meeting with Olivia. Ryan's eyebrows went up slightly. What kind of meeting? Nobody said. Huh. Ryan picked up his coffee. I hope she doesn't offer him Baum's job. Carla almost smiled. Baum didn't have a job here. He was a consultant. I know, Ryan said. I still hope she doesn't offer it to him. Yet. Aiko Tanaka spent most of Wednesday in the documents room, which was a converted storage space off the main corridor with a long table, a wall monitor, and the underpopulated quiet of a room that existed mainly for overflow work. She had requested the vehicle's full technical documentation, the original manufacturer specifications, the commission build file, and the service records from the previous 11 months, and had been working through them with the systematic care of someone who had decided to understand what had happened, beginning to end. Marcus checked on her at noon and asked if she needed anything. The original specification for the secondary power distribution connector, she said without looking up. Not the service specification. The manufacturing specification from the commission build. That might take some time to get from the manufacturer. I've already contacted them, Tanaka said. I should have it by this afternoon. She paused. I'm also curious who specified the custom thermal management layout. The standard Apex configuration routes the thermal cycling away from that section of the bay. Someone modified it for this build. Marcus looked at the document spread in front of her. Is that significant? Tanaka looked up. It's the reason the fault developed, she said. The connector was built under spec, 0.5 millimeter short, which is within the tolerance bands for a standard installation. But the modified thermal routing exposed that connector to cycling conditions outside what the standard tolerance accounts for. It's 2 separate decisions made at 2 separate stages of the build process, and nobody connected them. How did Nathan Brooks know to look there? Marcus said. Tanaka was quiet for a moment. He didn't know. He noticed a detail and asked a question. The difference between what he did and what my team did is that my team had already decided the answer wasn't mechanical. She looked back at her documents. We decided it was electrical. And once you've decided the shape of the answer, you stop seeing shapes that don't fit. She went back to her work. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, then left. Nathan Brooks, meanwhile, spent Wednesday and Thursday doing exactly what he'd been doing before the delivery run to the Kensington facility, running his shop. The shop occupied a converted 2-bay garage on the east side of Elmwood's modest commercial strip, 2 blocks from the hardware store and across from a dry cleaner that had been there longer than Nathan could remember. The building was not impressive. The sign above the door, Brooks Auto Repair, had been painted by Nathan himself, white letters on a dark green background, and was starting to show its age. Inside, the space was organized with a precision that the exterior did not suggest. Tools in their specific places. Fluid inventory in labeled rows. The kind of organization that looked unassuming until you worked in it and realized nothing was ever where you didn't expect it to be. He had 3 jobs on Wednesday. A brake replacement on a mid-range SUV, a transmission fluid service on a delivery van, and a persistent idle, rough-running problem on a 12-year-old sedan whose owner, a retired teacher named Mrs. Galloway, had been coming to Nathan for 7 years and brought him cookies at Christmas. The idle problem took the longest. It was the kind of fault that hid between symptoms, that produced inconsistent readings, and had almost certainly been misdiagnosed at least once before. He found it in the early afternoon, a hairline crack in an intake manifold runner that flexed under operating temperature and was invisible at rest. Mrs. Galloway came to pick up the car at 4:30. "Is it fixed?" she asked, with the faint hopefulness of someone who had asked this question several times already. "It's fixed," Nathan said. She looked at him. "You're sure this time?" "I'm sure." She paid, thanked him, and drove away. He watched her go, then went back inside and wrote up the repair record. He was particular about repair records. Full detail, every step, the diagnosis and the method and the reasoning. Not because anyone would read them, because it was the record of what had actually happened, and that mattered to him even when it didn't matter to anyone else. He thought about the Kensington meeting while he was closing up Thursday evening. He wasn't nervous about it exactly. He was something more like cautious. The caution of a man who had been in situations before where someone with money and a problem had looked at him as a solution and hadn't fully thought through what that meant. He had made assumptions about the meeting, a thank you perhaps, or a professional courtesy conversation, the kind of thing that rich people did to feel like they'd handled a situation properly. He would be polite, say what he'd observed about the car, and drive home. He set the alarm, locked the shop, and got in his truck. The drive home took 8 minutes. He lived in a small house at the end of a residential street that backed up to a patch of second-growth woods, the kind of house that was exactly what it needed to be, not more. He'd lived there for 6 years. There was a detached garage at the back, where he kept a project car under its own fitted cover, a 1971 muscle car that he was restoring without urgency, one component at a time for reasons that had more to do with understanding its engineering than with any destination for the finished product. He made dinner, checked the weather for Friday, and went to bed. He didn't think about the Kensington meeting again until he was most of the way there on Friday afternoon. And what he thought was not about what he might gain from it, but about the connector housing, and whether the manufacturer had been informed, and whether the other 10 cars in the commission run had the same dimensional variance. Marcus Hale met him at the facility's main entrance at 2 o'clock precisely. Nathan had driven his truck, which was clean but recognizably a work truck. The bed had a tool chest bolted to it, and there was a faint trace of oil on the passenger door that he'd missed when he wiped it down. He wore dark pants and a button-down shirt, which was as much as the occasion seemed to warrant. He'd left the work clothes in the shop. "Mr. Brooks?" Marcus said, shaking his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Sure," Nathan said. He looked at the building as they went in. "Different entrance than last time." "The main entrance," Marcus confirmed. "Different purpose." They went through the lobby, which Nathan took in without comment. The high ceilings, the display models in their glass bays, the specific combination of money and understatement that luxury automotive retail had perfected over decades. He wasn't uncomfortable in it. He just noticed it the way he noticed everything. Olivia met them in a conference room on the second floor. Not the large meeting room with the glass floor panel. A smaller one, with a table for 4, a window overlooking the service yard, and no particular staging. Nathan registered this. It was either a small meeting or a meeting that didn't want to feel large. Olivia was standing when they came in. She shook his hand. Firm, brief, direct. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Sit down." They sat. Marcus took the seat beside Olivia. Nathan sat across from them. "Coffee?" Olivia said. "If it's there," Nathan said. It was there. Marcus poured. There was a brief functional pause while this happened, and then Olivia folded her hands on the table and looked at Nathan. "I'll be direct," she said. "I'm not good at preamble." "Neither am I," Nathan said. "The Valerian Apex is running well. We've completed a full system check since Tuesday, and the repair is solid." She paused. "I've spent a fair amount of time this week thinking about what happened in that service bay. Not the fix itself. The fix was straightforward once you knew what to look for. I've been thinking about the 8 days before the fix." Nathan waited. "I have very good people. Olivia said. And I have access to some of the best consultants in the world. The team I assembled for that car was the best I could put together. And they failed. Not because they were incompetent, Doctor. Baum runs the diagnostic division for one of the largest automotive engineering groups in Europe. He's not incompetent. He failed because he was working from a framework, and the problem existed outside the framework. She looked at him. You didn't have a framework. You just looked. I had a framework, Nathan said. It was just different. What was your framework? He considered the question. When a machine doesn't work, there are two kinds of reasons. Either something is broken or something was never right. Most diagnostic systems are built to find things that are broken. Faults, failures, deviations from a condition that previously existed. They're not as good at finding things that were never right, because those don't look like failures. They look like normal. Olivia was quiet for a moment. And you could see that from a gap in a dust cover. I could see a compression inconsistency in the lower panel. That made me think about what was behind it, and I know enough about how the Apex series is built to know what's behind it. How do you know the Apex series? Nathan picked up his coffee. The original designer published a full technical monograph on the platform architecture when the car debuted. I read it. That monograph is not commercially available, Olivia said. It was presented at an engineering symposium. I have a friend who attended. He sent me the PDF. Nathan paused. I don't usually have occasion to use it, but I read it. Olivia looked at him for a moment. Then, for the first time in the conversation, she almost smiled. Not a full smile, not a warm one, but the expression of someone encountering something that confirmed a suspicion they had wanted confirmed. You read a technical monograph on a $4 million hypercar in case you ever encountered one. I read it because it interested me, Nathan said. The connector housing dimensional variance. I'd actually noted it when I read the spec. It was within tolerance for standard thermal conditions. He stopped. You remembered it, Marcus said. I remembered it, Nathan agreed. And when I saw the compression inconsistency in the panel, it connected. The room was quiet for a moment. I have 14 facilities, Olivia said, in 4 states. I have service departments at each of them, and I have a central technical support team. What I don't have is someone whose job it is to think about problems the way you thought about that car. Nathan set down his coffee. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means I would like to talk about a consulting arrangement, not a full-time position. I understand you have your shop, but a retainer. Difficult cases, unusual faults, problems that the standard process isn't solving. The kind of work that needs someone with a different framework. Nathan looked at her steadily. How many cases are we talking about? I don't know. That's honest. We might go 3 months without anything worth bringing to you. Or we might have something next week. The value isn't in the volume. It's in having access to someone who can look at the cases nobody else can close. She paused. I would pay for your time, the retainer, your travel. You'd keep your shop. You'd have full latitude to say no to anything that doesn't fit. Nathan looked out the window at the service yard below. A technician was moving a car on a low dolly, slowly, with the careful deliberation of someone moving something expensive. He watched for a moment. I have one question, he said. Go ahead. The other 10 cars in the Apex Commission run. Have you contacted Valerian about the connector housing spec? Olivia looked at him. That's your question? Yes. Not about the retainer terms or the compensation or what the work looks like. I'll get to those, Nathan said. But if there are 10 other cars out there with the same underspec connector and the same modified thermal routing, that's a potential safety issue. Maybe not serious, it's an ignition failure, not a structural fault, but the owners should know. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Marcus reached out to Valerian on Wednesday. Their engineering team is reviewing the commission build documentation. They've also identified that the thermal routing modification was specified by the buyer, not by Valerian, which is an interesting wrinkle. The buyer specified a modification that created conditions the original spec didn't account for, Nathan said. Correct. Did you specify the modification? Olivia paused. It was a short pause, but Nathan caught it. I specified certain thermal management preferences, she said, based on the performance profile I wanted. The application of that preference to the routing was done by the build team. I wasn't aware of the specific consequence. Nathan nodded, not pressing it. Okay. Okay, Olivia said. So, the retainer. They talked for 50 minutes. Nathan asked specific questions about the kinds of faults that came through the service departments, about the technical documentation access she could provide, about whether his judgment or a consensus process would determine whether he engaged with a given case. Olivia answered each one directly. On the judgment question, she said, "Your judgment. That's the whole point. If I wanted a committee, I already have one." On compensation, she named a figure. Nathan didn't react to it immediately. He looked out the window again, with the quality of someone doing actual arithmetic, not performing consideration. Then he named a modification to the structure, not the rate, that had to do with how travel time was calculated. Olivia agreed without negotiation. It was not a significant modification, and she would have agreed to it in any case, but she noticed that he had made it, that he had read the terms carefully enough to find the one piece worth adjusting. Marcus was taking notes. When they were done, Olivia sat back slightly. "One more thing," she said. "The specialists who were here, Baum's team, Tanaka. I want to be clear about something. I'm not bringing you in as a replacement for that kind of expertise. I'm bringing you in as a different kind of expertise. They'll still be my first call for manufacturer-level diagnostic work." "I understand that," Nathan said. "Good. Because I don't want you walking into a facility and having the staff treat you like you won something." Nathan looked at her. "I fixed a connector housing. It's not that complicated. To you, maybe. To anyone who knew where to look," he said. "They just didn't know where to look. That's not their fault. It's a gap in the test framework. Now, they know about the gap. That's worth more than me fixing one car." Olivia studied him. "You know," she said, "most people in your position would be at least a little bit pleased with themselves." "I am, a little bit," Nathan said. "I just don't think it needs to be announced." Marcus looked up from his notes. He had the expression of a man who had heard a lot of people say a version of that and had learned to tell the difference between the ones who meant it and the ones who were performing humility as a strategy. He looked at Nathan for a moment, then went back to his notes. They shook hands at the door of the conference room. "One thing I want to ask you," Nathan said. He had his jacket over his arm, standing in the doorway. "Go ahead." "When you were sitting in the car after it started, you sat there for a few minutes. What were you thinking?" Olivia was quiet for a moment. "I was thinking about the 8 days," she said, "and whether I had missed something obvious the way everyone else did, whether I had been asking the wrong questions." She paused. "Had I?" Nathan thought about it honestly. "Not wrong questions," he said. "The right questions to the wrong people. The people you asked are good at finding things that have gone wrong. They're not trained to look for things that were built wrong from the start. Is there a difference?" "Yes," he said. "A fault develops. A flaw is already there. You have to know you're looking for it, and you have to know what it looks like when nothing looks wrong." Olivia looked at him for a moment. "Friday afternoon," she said. "First case may come sooner." "I'll be ready," Nathan said. He walked down the corridor toward the stairs, and Olivia watched him go, not with the particular regard of someone watching a dramatic exit, just watching, the way you watch a thing you are trying to understand. Marcus appeared beside her. "He's different," he said. "Yes," Olivia said. "Good different," or "good different," she said. "Let's go over the agreement terms before he gets back on the highway." She turned and went back into the conference room. Below, through the window that overlooked the service yard, the covered shape of the Valerian apex was just visible at the edge of the main bay. It sat in its correct functional silence. Not a problem anymore. Just a car. Just a car that had taught everyone in the building something they wouldn't have thought to look for. Marcus gathered his notes and followed her in. Carla was at the parts counter when Nathan came through the lobby on his way out. She was picking up a filter order which had nothing to do with anything, but she happened to be there when he came through the door from the corridor, and she looked up. "Hey," she said. "Hey," Nathan said. She looked at him for a moment. "Good meeting?" "I think so," he said. She nodded. There was a pause that had the slight awkwardness of two people who'd shared an unusual experience and weren't sure how to reference it in casual conversation. "The thing you said," Carla said, "about the diagnostic systems testing electrical function but not physical seating pressure. I told that to two of the guys in the shop. We've been talking about it all week." "It's worth thinking about," Nathan said. "Every test framework has a shape. The things outside the shape don't show up." "How do you find the things outside the shape?" He thought about it. "You look at the object instead of the test result," he said. "The test result tells you what the framework found. The object tells you what's actually there." Carla looked at him. "That sounds simple." "It is simple," Nathan said. "Simple isn't the same as easy." She nodded slowly. "You cleaned the surface," she said. "Before you fitted the shim, you didn't have to." Nathan looked at her. "No." "Why did you?" He considered it for a moment. "Because if I'm going to fix something, I'm going to fix it correctly. If you're going to put a precision component into a contact interface, you clean the surface. That's just, He paused. "That's just what you do." Carla looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her filter order. "See you around, Mr. Brooks," she said. "Nathan," he said. "Nathan," she said. "See you around." He went out through the main entrance. The afternoon was overcast, the light flat and even. His truck was where he'd left it, in the visitor section. He got in, checked the time, and pulled out his phone to call the shop. "Jake," he said when it picked up, "how's the fuel system job?" "Done," Jake said. "Cleared the fault code and road tested it. It's good." "Great. Log it and I'll write up the record tonight. How's the Hendricks car?" "Still waiting on the part." "Call them and let them know. Estimated Wednesday." "Got it." A pause. "How was the meeting?" "Interesting," Nathan said. "You taking the job?" Nathan started the truck. The engine turned over cleanly the way a well-maintained engine did. He'd rebuilt this particular engine himself 2 years ago, over 3 weekends, for no other reason than that he wanted to understand it from the inside. "Yeah," he said. "I think so." He backed out of the parking spot and pulled toward the exit. Through the facility's glass front, as he turned toward the road, he caught a brief glimpse of the main service corridor, the pale composite floors, the high ceilings, the particular quality of light that expensive facilities worked hard to achieve. He'd driven 40 minutes to deliver filters and come away with something he hadn't planned on. He thought about the connector housing, the half-millimeter, the gap between what the test found and what was actually there. He turned onto the access road and headed east toward Elmwood. The first case came 11 days after the Friday meeting. It was not from the main facility. It came from Kensington's dealership in Hargrove, a mid-sized city 2 hours north, the kind of place that had once been a manufacturing hub and had spent the last 30 years figuring out what it was instead. The Hargrove location was the group's third largest by revenue and had a service department that Olivia privately considered her most reliable outside the flagship. The manager there was a man named Gerald Pruitt, who had been with Kensington for 11 years and was known for running a clean operation. Gerald called Marcus on a Tuesday afternoon. "We have a situation," he said, which was Gerald's way of saying the situation was bad enough that he didn't want to describe it over the phone without first establishing that it was serious. Marcus listened for 4 minutes. Then he called Olivia. The vehicle was a Hessler Grand Tourism, a German Grand Tourer at the upper end of the luxury segment, not quite hypercar territory, but far enough into the high 6 figures to make every unresolved problem expensive. The car belonged to a client named Warren Elliott, who had purchased it 14 months ago and had brought it in 3 times in the past 4 months with the same complaint. Under certain conditions, the car's active suspension system produced a lateral instability that the client described as a feeling that the car was deciding, briefly and without warning, to change direction on its own. The first 2 visits had produced no fault codes, no measurable deviation in the suspension geometry, and no reproducible symptom during the technician's test drives. The car had been returned to the client both times with a service note that said, in varying ways, that no fault had been identified. Warren Elliott had accepted this twice. He was not going to accept it a 3rd time. He called the manufacturer's client relations line, Gerald told Marcus. He filed a formal complaint. He's also... A pause. He mentioned a lawyer. What's the car doing right now? Marcus asked. It's in the bay. We've had it since Monday. 2 of my best techs have been on it. Clean on diagnostics, clean on geometry check. They took it out this morning for a 40-minute drive and couldn't reproduce the symptom. Is the client's description consistent? Very. He says it happens at highway speeds between 70 and 80 miles an hour and only on left-hand curves. He says it's happened 6 times in 4 months. He says it feels like the rear of the car steps out 2 or 3 degrees and then corrects. Marcus wrote this down. And the diagnostic systems show nothing. Nothing, Gerald said, which is why I'm calling you. Marcus called Nathan that evening. Nathan was in his shop finishing the Hendricks car. He had the phone wedged between his ear and his shoulder, which wasn't how he usually took calls. But the oil filter was at a particular point in its removal that didn't permit both hands to be free. Tell me the symptom again, he said after Marcus had given him the overview. Marcus told him again. Left-hand curves only, Nathan said, 70 to 80 miles an hour. That's the client's description. And the active suspension is showing clean? Every test they've run. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Has anyone looked at the passive elements? Not the active system, the physical components. Bushings, mounts, geometry under load. I don't know, Marcus said. The Hessler Grand Tourism's active suspension has a known characteristic, Nathan said. Under lateral load, there's a brief moment before the active system responds where the passive geometry carries the full load. It's usually under 100 milliseconds, not enough time to feel in normal conditions. But if there's a compliance issue in the passive elements, that window can extend. The active system can't compensate for a problem it sees as already corrected. A silence. Can you come tomorrow? Marcus said. I've got a morning job I can't move. I can be there by noon. I'll tell Gerald. Nathan drove up the next morning in his truck, arriving at the Hargrove facility at 12:15, which was close enough. Gerald Pruitt met him in the service area. A stocky man in his mid-50s with a gray mustache and the particular wariness of someone who had managed a high-end service department long enough to have seen a great many people come through claiming they could solve things his team couldn't. He was not hostile. He was careful. Marcus tells me you looked at the Valerian Apex at the main facility, Gerald said. I did, Nathan said. The connector housing issue. Gerald nodded. He had clearly read the service record. Good catch. Thank you. This one's different, Gerald said. The Apex was a non-start, clear symptom, no diagnosis. This is an intermittent handling issue that we can't reproduce. The client's description is consistent, but we can't verify it. I understand, Nathan said. Can I see the car? Gerald walked him to the bay. The Hessler was a dark charcoal gray, lower and longer than most cars in its segment, built with the kind of restrained visual aggression that the best German manufacturers had refined over decades. It looked, Nathan thought, exactly like what it was. A very expensive machine designed to travel very quickly in great comfort while appearing to make no particular effort. He walked around it once, not touching it, just looking. The client says left-hand curves, Nathan said. Highway speed. Yes. Has anyone driven it at those specific conditions? Twice, Gerald said. This morning and yesterday afternoon, both times on the same highway stretch we use for testing. No symptom. What time of day? Gerald looked at him. This morning was 9:15. Yesterday was around 3. Warren Elliott. When does the symptom happen for him? Time of day? Gerald thought about it. He didn't specify. Do you have his contact number? Nathan said. I'd like to ask him directly. Gerald hesitated. Not because he objected, Nathan sensed, but because he was assessing whether this was a reasonable request or the beginning of something that would complicate the client relationship further. He apparently decided it was reasonable. I'll call him, Gerald said. You can talk to him from my office. Warren Elliott answered on the second ring. He was 61, Nathan gathered from the voice and the context. A man with the self-contained irritation of someone who had spent a lot of money on something that was disappointing him. He was not aggressive on the phone, but he was precise, which Nathan respected. Mr. Elliott, Nathan said, I want to ask you a few questions about the symptom, not about what the service team has done, about your experience of it. All right, Elliott said. The 6 times it's happened, Do you remember what the conditions were? Temperature, time of day, how long you'd been driving? A pause. It's happened in the evening mostly, after work, and once on a Sunday morning, which was the first time. I remember because it startled me and I pulled over. Another pause. Cold, most times. The Sunday morning it was, 50 degrees maybe. The evenings it's been cold. This is spring, so how long had you been driving before it happened? Not long, 10 minutes maybe. 15. So the car hadn't been running long. The systems were still in warm-up range. I suppose so. Elliot stopped. Is that relevant? It might be, Nathan said. One more question. The first time it happened, the Sunday morning, had the car been sitting for a while before you drove it? A longer pause. Overnight. I'd left it at a friend's house. Outdoor parking. Overnight in cold weather. Yes. Nathan thanked him, said he would follow up through Gerald, and handed the phone back. Gerald was watching him from across the desk. Cold conditions, he said, after sitting. Thermal contraction, Nathan said. If there's a compliance issue in one of the passive mounts, the clearance in the mount changes with temperature. Cold conditions, short warm-up time. The mount hasn't fully normalized to operating temperature. Under lateral load at highway speed, it introduces a momentary compliance variance before the active system can compensate. Gerald was quiet. The active system test won't find it, Nathan continued, because the active system is functioning correctly. The issue is in the passive element beneath it. And the standard geometry check won't find it because the geometry check is done at static conditions, the car sitting still in the bay. The fault only appears under dynamic lateral load at specific thermal conditions. We've been testing in the wrong conditions, Gerald said. You've been testing the way the manual says to test it, Nathan said, which is correct for most faults. This isn't most faults. Gerald stood up. Show me. They pulled the car off the alignment rack and put it on a lift in the main bay. Nathan's first request was a thermal gun, which Gerald's senior technician, a careful, deliberate man named Steve, who had been skeptical of Nathan's presence but was now simply quiet, produced without comment. Nathan started at the rear suspension. He worked methodically, not quickly, checking each mount and bushing with the thermal gun while the car had been cold. It had been sitting in the bay overnight, and the morning was still chilly enough that the internal temperature was well below operating range. He was looking for temperature differential between matched components, which would suggest a material or density difference that could affect thermal behavior. He found it in the right rear lower control arm bushing. The temperature differential was small, 4 degrees between the right rear and the left rear, which shouldn't have existed in matched components at rest. It was the kind of reading that would probably not trigger any alarm in a standard diagnostic sweep, because 4 degrees at rest was within a range that most diagnostic protocols didn't flag. But it was there. Nathan straightened up. This bushing, he said, pointing without touching it. Can you get me a light? Steve handed him a flashlight. Nathan directed it at the bushing from 2 angles. There, he said. Steve leaned in. Gerald leaned in. On the outer face of the bushing, barely visible, requiring the specific angle of light that Nathan had found, there was a hairline irregularity in the rubber compound. Not a crack, not a visible deformation. A density variation in the material, detectable as a very faint surface irregularity, suggesting that the bushing had been manufactured with an inconsistency in its vulcanization. The bushing was built wrong, Steve said. It wasn't a question. It's within visual spec, Nathan said. Probably within dimensional spec too, which is why it didn't flag at quality control. But the density variation means it responds differently to thermal cycling than a correct bushing. Cold conditions. It's stiffer on one side of the compound than the other. Under lateral load, that asymmetry introduces a momentary deflection. 4 months of thermal cycling has probably accelerated the degradation. The bay was quiet. Steve looked at the bushing for a long moment. He had the expression of someone who was revisiting the last 4 months of service history in light of what he was now seeing and finding the calculation uncomfortable. If we'd replaced this on the first visit, he said. You wouldn't have known to, Nathan said. The diagnostic path doesn't lead here. I should have. The diagnostic path doesn't lead here, Nathan said again, more deliberately. That's not on you. That's a gap in the path. Steve looked at him. There was something in Nathan's response that Steve appeared to register. Not reassurance exactly, but a specific refusal to make the moment about blame. Steve nodded once and went to get the specification manual for the control arm bushing. Gerald stepped back from the lift. How long to replace it? Hour and a half, Steve said. If we have the part. Gerald went to check inventory. Nathan stood at the side of the lift while Steve began the removal procedure. He watched Steve work, clean, practice movements, the kind of economy that came from years of doing the same things correctly until they stopped requiring thought. After a few minutes, Steve looked up. Where'd you learn to read thermal differential? He asked. I worked on a track team for 2 seasons, Nathan said. Road racing. The thermal management of tire and suspension components is critical at that level. You get a lot of practice with the gun. What track? Regional circuit stuff. Nothing major. But the diagnostic requirements are the same, sometimes more demanding because you're working in time pressure. Steve considered this. You still do that? No, I have the shop now. Nathan paused. Different kind of pressure. Steve almost smiled. He went back to the bushing. The part was in inventory. The replacement took 90 minutes, which was slightly over Steve's estimate because the original bushing, when it came off, showed additional signs of internal degradation that required a more thorough cleaning of the mounting surfaces. Nathan observed most of it, occasionally asked to look at a specific component, and otherwise stayed out of Steve's way. Gerald came back to the bay at the 3-hour mark and found Nathan sitting on a stool near the side bench, writing in his notepad. Steve had the car on the ground and was doing a post-installation geometry confirmation. How do we verify it fixed the problem? Gerald asked Nathan. We can't exactly reproduce the thermal conditions in here. You need to do a cold test drive, Nathan said. Leave the car outside overnight, in conditions as close to what Elliot describes as possible. Tomorrow morning, early, before the bay temperature affects anything, take it out and run the exact course at the conditions described. Left-hand curves, 70 to 80 miles an hour, after a cold soak. That's not a standard test protocol. No, Nathan said. But it's the test the car actually needs. Gerald looked at him for a moment. You want to be there for the test drive? Nathan looked at his notepad, then at Gerald. If you're comfortable with that. Steve will drive, Gerald said. You can ride along. The next morning was 48 degrees, overcast, with the flat gray quality of early spring air that hasn't yet committed to warming up. The Hessler had been parked outside overnight, and the service bay thermometer confirmed it had reached an internal temperature of 41 degrees before the garage doors opened. Steve drove. Nathan was in the passenger seat. He had a notepad on his knee and nothing else. No diagnostic equipment, no instruments, just his attention. Steve took the car onto the highway and ran north, building speed carefully. The car felt different from the inside than Nathan had expected. It had the quality of total mechanical confidence, the sense that the road surface was something it was processing rather than experiencing. At 60, the car was calm. At 70, it was the same. Steve hit the first major left-hand curve at 74 miles an hour. The car tracked through it cleanly. No hesitation, no lateral suggestion, no moment of the car considering another direction. The suspension did exactly what it was designed to do. Absorbed the load, managed the geometry, held the line. Neither of them said anything. Steve ran the course for 20 minutes. Every left-hand curve on the stretch, twice through, at varying speeds between 70 and 80. The car was, in every instance, completely composed. On the way back, Steve said, "It's gone." "Yes," Nathan said. "How sure are you it was the bushing?" "I'm sure the bushing was wrong," Nathan said. "I'm reasonably sure the bushing was the problem. The test this morning supports that. If Elliot drives it for another month and doesn't have the symptom, you can be certain." "What do I tell Gerald?" "Tell him the bushing showed material inconsistency consistent with irregular thermal response. Replaced under warranty. Post-installation test drive, in target conditions, produced no symptom recurrence. Recommend monitoring for 1 month." Steve looked at the road. "That sounds like a report." "It is a report," Nathan said. "Write it that way. Exactly that way. If Elliot has any further questions, the documentation should answer them." Steve nodded slowly. You wrote it in your head on the way back, Steve said. I was thinking about how to explain it clearly, Nathan said. To who? Gerald? To Elliot, Nathan said. He's been told twice that nothing was found. He deserves an explanation that tells him what was actually wrong, in terms he can follow, without making him feel like he was imagining it for 4 months. He paused. Because he wasn't imagining it. There was a fault. It was real. It just needed someone to look in the right place. Steve was quiet for a moment. You're not what I expected, he said. Nathan looked out the window at the highway. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone who wanted to make us look bad, maybe. Why would I want that? Because we missed it twice. You used the right tools for the wrong conditions, Nathan said. That's a systems problem, not a competence problem. You're a good technician. Anyone can see that. Steve said nothing for a moment. Then, the density variation in the bushing, I've never seen that flagged in a diagnostic result. It won't be. The diagnostic software isn't testing for material consistency. It's testing for dimensional and electrical compliance. The bushing is within dimensional spec, within electrical spec. As far as the diagnostic system is concerned, it's fine. So how does someone find it without what you did? The thermal gun, the light angle? You can feel it sometimes, Nathan said. If you compress the bushing by hand and it feels inconsistent, one side more resistant than the other. But that's a judgment call, and most diagnostic protocols don't include manual compression checks because they're subjective. The thermal reading is more objective. Should we be doing thermal checks on passive suspension components as a standard step? Nathan considered it. On vehicles with active suspension systems, yes, I think so. Particularly on the first visit with a handling complaint that the active system diagnostics don't resolve. Steve drove in silence for the last few minutes back to the facility. When he pulled into the service yard, he sat for a moment before opening the door. I'm going to add it to the intake protocol, he said. The thermal check, for handling complaints. That's a good idea, Nathan said. Chat. Gerald called Olivia that afternoon with the update. He was not a man given to effusive reports, but Olivia could hear something different in his voice. Not excitement, but the particular quality of professional respect that Gerald Pruitt reserved for things that had earned it. He was in and out in about 4 hours total, Gerald said. Identified the fault, supervised the repair, road tested it in conditions that matched the client's description. Clean. How did Steve take it? Olivia asked. Steve's already updating the intake protocol, Gerald said, which tells you something. How did Nathan handle the staff? Gerald paused. No drama, he said. He explained the fault in terms that made sense. He was specific about why the diagnostic path didn't lead there. He made it clear it wasn't a competence failure on our part, which it wasn't, but it matters that he said it. Olivia was at her desk, looking out the window at the service yard below, where the main facility's afternoon rhythm was in motion. What about Elliot? I'm calling him this afternoon. Nathan wrote up a client explanation. Plain language, what was wrong, why it wasn't caught sooner, what was done to fix it. A pause. It's a good document. Clear, accurate, nothing defensive. Send me a copy, Olivia said. The document arrived by email 20 minutes later. Olivia read it twice. It was 4 paragraphs in plain language, structured like a letter rather than a technical report. It explained the bushing fault, the thermal conditions under which it manifested, and the reason standard diagnostic procedures had not detected it. The last paragraph said, in words that Nathan had apparently written directly, the symptom you experienced was genuine. The fault was real, and it has been corrected. The delay in diagnosis was a result of the specific nature of the fault. It only appears under conditions that standard testing does not reproduce, and not a reflection of the seriousness with which your concerns were taken. Olivia read that paragraph 3 times. She picked up her phone and called Nathan. He answered on the 3rd ring. Brooks Auto. The Elliot document, she said. Is there a problem with it? No, she said. I want to know why you wrote it that way. The last paragraph. A brief pause. Because he was right, Nathan said. He knew something was wrong with his car. He said so 3 times. 3 times he was told there was no fault. It's a hard experience. Being right about something and being told you're wrong by people you're paying to know better. Olivia said nothing for a moment. He deserves to know he wasn't imagining it, Nathan said. Most repair shops don't write that kind of document. Most repair shops don't get 3 visits for the same complaint without finding the fault, Nathan said, without edge. In that situation, the client is owed honesty. Olivia sat back in her chair. Outside, a car was moving through the service yard slowly, driven by one of the techs. Ordinary afternoon, the kind of afternoon that contained hundreds of small decisions that would never be examined, none of which would matter until one did. The first visit was 11 days ago, she said. You've closed 1 case. I know. The next one might be harder. They usually get harder, Nathan said. Does that bother you? He thought about it. No, he said. Harder usually means more interesting. She heard something in the background of his end. The shop, she assumed. The faint sound of a wrench or an engine turning over. He was already back at work. Friday, I'll have Marcus send you the case log for the past 6 months, Olivia said. All the unresolved complaints across the network. I want you to look through them. Looking for what? Patterns, she said. Things that look like each other from a distance. A pause. Okay. And Nathan? Yeah. The Elliott document. I'm sending it to the training coordinator. I want it used as an example in client communication training. A pause longer than the previous ones. For what part? For the part where you tell the client the truth, she said, including the part that's uncomfortable. She paused. Most people avoid that part. Most people think avoiding it makes the client feel better, Nathan said. Does it? No, he said. It makes them feel better. The client always knows when they're being managed. Olivia looked at the window again. The car in the service yard had parked. The afternoon was ordinary and unhurried. I'll have Marcus send the log, she said. She hung up. Whoa. The case log arrived on Friday morning. Nathan printed it at the shop. 31 pages, covering 14 facilities and 6 months of unresolved complaints, coded by vehicle type, symptom description, and number of service visits without resolution. He read it over 2 evenings at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a red pen. Some of the cases were straightforward, complaints that had probably resolved themselves, or that were awaiting parts, or that were intermittent enough that their absence from the record was likely the client simply stopping calling. He marked those in light pencil. Some were more interesting. He circled 4 cases with the red pen. 2 were handling complaints, different vehicles, different facilities, different symptom descriptions, but with a structural similarity to the Elliott case. Intermittent, condition-specific, undetectable under standard testing. One was an electrical fault on a high-end British sedan that had produced 3 separate visits and 3 different diagnostic conclusions, none of which had resolved the underlying complaint. One was something he hadn't encountered before, a client complaint about an inconsistency in the vehicle's power delivery that the service notes described as possibly psychological and that Nathan found professionally irritating as a phrase. He wrote notes beside each circled case. He also noticed something he hadn't expected. 3 of the 4 circled cases, the handling complaints and the power delivery complaint, were from facilities that had been using the same third-party diagnostic software platform, updated to the same version, within the same 3-month window. That was probably coincidence. But it was a coincidence worth noting, because software updates sometimes introduce changes to test thresholds that weren't adequately documented. And if a threshold had shifted, it could explain why cases that would previously have flagged were no longer flagging. He wrote this on a separate page, with a question mark. Then he called Marcus. I've looked at the log, he said. I want to come in Monday and talk about 4 specific cases, but I also want to ask you about the diagnostic software platform. Which platform? Nathan gave him the name. A brief silence. We updated that platform in January, Marcus said, across 9 facilities. Which 9? Marcus checked. He named them. 3 of them matched the facilities in Nathan's circled cases. Nathan looked at his notes. I think there might be a threshold change in the January update that's affecting how the platform handles certain intermittent fault signatures. If I'm right, you may have other cases in the log that are related to it that I haven't identified yet. Marcus was quiet for a moment. How confident are you? Not confident, Nathan said. It's a hypothesis. I need to look at the software documentation and compare test parameters from the pre-update version to the current one. Do you have access to both? I can get them, Marcus said. Monday, Nathan said. He hung up, looked at his notes, and went back to the remaining 27 pages of the log. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet. Outside, the spring night was doing what spring nights did. Cooling, settling, the particular stillness of a world that wasn't asking anything of anyone. Nathan refilled his coffee and kept reading. Not because it was his job exactly, because somewhere in 27 pages of unresolved complaints, there were people who had driven their cars, felt something wrong, been told nothing was wrong, and gone home with the uneasy knowledge that the machines they trusted were carrying something nobody had found yet. He kept reading until he found the next one. Monday came with rain. Not the dramatic kind, just the steady gray indifferent rain of mid-spring that made everything outside look slightly less resolved than it actually was. Nathan drove up from Elmwood in the dark at 6:15, the truck's wipers running at their middle setting, the case log pages in a folder on the passenger seat. He had read through the remaining 27 pages twice more over the weekend and had added 2 more cases to his circled list, bringing the total to 6. He had also spent most of Sunday afternoon on the phone with an engineering contact who had worked at the diagnostic software company until 18 months ago and now consulted independently. The contact's name was Dennis Park. He was methodical, slightly irritable when asked questions he considered imprecise, and one of the 3 people Nathan trusted most on software-hardware diagnostic interface issues. Dennis had listened to Nathan's hypothesis about the January update and been quiet for a while before saying, I'd need to see the parameter documentation, but the threshold recalibration in that version was contentious internally. I can tell you that. Contentious how? Nathan had asked. There was a debate about whether the new intermittent fault signature threshold was conservative enough. The argument for the change was reducing false positives. The argument against was that you'd miss genuine low-amplitude faults. A pause. The change went through. I don't know what the field data looks like since. I'm looking at the field data, Nathan said. Send me what you find, Dennis said. I'm curious. Nathan had not yet sent him anything, because what he had was still a hypothesis with 6 data points, which was not enough to accuse a software update of creating systemic diagnostic gaps across a 14-facility network. But it was enough to take seriously. He arrived at the main facility at 7:40. The rain had eased slightly by then, not stopped. The building's lobby was already occupied. The early staff, the service technicians whose first appointments began at 8. He found Marcus in the upstairs corridor with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had read Nathan's preliminary notes from Friday and spent the weekend thinking about what they meant. Olivia wants to be in the meeting, Marcus said. Okay, Nathan said. She's been in since 6:30. Okay. She read your notes about the software update hypothesis, Marcus said. She didn't say much about it, which usually means she's thinking about it seriously. Nathan nodded. He had written his notes carefully, specific, without overclaiming, making clear the difference between what he had observed and what he was inferring. He'd done that not to protect himself, but because the distinction mattered. If you blurred the line between evidence and hypothesis, you ended up chasing your own assumptions. The meeting was in the small conference room again, the one with the window overlooking the service yard. Olivia was at the table when they came in. She looked like she had been there for a while and was not bothered by that. She had a printed copy of Nathan's notes in front of her, with 3 lines underlined in pen. Sit down, she said. Tell me about the software update. Yep. Nathan laid it out methodically. He started with the 6 cases, placed them on the table in a sequence, summarized the shared characteristics, and explained why he believed the structural similarities were meaningful rather than coincidental. Then he talked about the software update, the facilities involved, the timing relative to the onset of the unresolved complaints, and what Dennis Park had told him about the threshold recalibration debate. Olivia listened without interrupting. Marcus took notes. When Nathan finished, the room was quiet for a moment. 6 cases, Olivia said, across 3 facilities, all post-January update. That's what the log shows, Nathan said. There may be more that I haven't identified because the symptom descriptions are too vague to pattern match from the written record. These 6 are the ones I can make an argument for. What's the argument? The intermittent fault signature threshold in the updated software was raised, Nathan said, meaning the software now requires a stronger fault signal before it flags. Low amplitude faults, faults that manifest intermittently only under specific conditions and don't produce a strong continuous signal, may now fall below the flagging threshold in cases where the previous version would have caught them. So the software isn't finding faults it should find, Olivia said. It's finding them less reliably, Nathan said. There's a difference. The previous version may have overflagged, produced false positives that sent technicians chasing non-existent problems. The recalibration trades false positives for increased risk of false negatives. Whether that trade was correctly calibrated is what I can't determine without the parameter documentation. Olivia looked at her notes. You want the documentation from the software company? Yes, and I want to compare it against the pre-update version. I have someone who can do that analysis if I can get him the files. Who? Nathan told her about Dennis Park. Olivia looked at Marcus. Get the documentation. Marcus was already writing. If the hypothesis is correct, Olivia said, turning back to Nathan, what does that mean practically for the network? It means you potentially have diagnostic gaps at 9 facilities that nobody knows about, Nathan said. Any intermittent fault that produces a low amplitude signature, suspension compliance issues, certain electrical intermittence, early stage component degradation may be going undetected. Not because the technicians are missing it, because the tool is telling them nothing is there. The room was quiet. How long would it take to know? Olivia asked. If I get the documentation by Wednesday, I can have an analysis by end of week, Nathan said. If Dennis confirms the threshold shift, you'll need to decide whether to roll back the update, request a recalibration from the software company, or supplement the protocol with manual checks for specific fault categories. None of those are quick, Olivia said. No, Nathan said, but they're all manageable. Olivia looked at her underlined notes. One of the underlined lines read, 6 cases across 3 facilities, maybe more. Another read, false negatives. Clients told nothing is wrong when something is wrong. She looked up. The clients in these 6 cases, have they all been told no fault was found? 5 of them, Nathan said. The 6th was the Elliott case, which is now closed. The other 5, she said, they're still waiting. Yes, but how long? Nathan opened his folder and checked. Between 6 weeks and 4 months. Olivia sat back in her chair. She had the look of someone doing arithmetic that wasn't about numbers. I want to talk to each of them personally, not through the service managers. Me, directly. Marcus looked up from his notes. Olivia? I'm aware of the optics, she said. The owner calling to say we have a systemic issue we didn't find sooner is not a conversation I'm looking forward to. But they've been waiting months for answers. And if Nathan's right about the software gap, they deserve to hear it from someone who can actually explain what happened and what we're doing about it. She paused. And if he's wrong, they deserve to hear that too. Nathan looked at her. You're not going to wait until the analysis is confirmed? He asked. I'm going to call them, she said, and tell them we've identified a potential issue with our diagnostic process. We're investigating it actively, and we'll have a specific answer for each of them by end of week. That's true whether you're right or wrong. That's more than most companies would do, Nathan said. I know, Olivia said. I'm not most companies? She stood. Get me the documentation. Tell Dennis Park I'll compensate him for the analysis time. She gathered her notes. Marcus, I want the software company on the phone by this afternoon, not their sales contact, their technical director. She walked to the door, then stopped. Nathan, she said. He looked up. The power delivery complaint, she said. The one the service notes described as possibly psychological. Yes. Which facility? Westfield, Nathan said. The client's name is... He checked his folder. Patricia Dunmore. She's been in twice. The note on the second visit says... He looked at it again and his expression changed slightly. The note says the technician discussed the possibility that the client's perception of the symptom may be influenced by anxiety about the vehicle's value. The room was quiet. "Who wrote that note?" Olivia asked. Her voice had not changed in pitch or speed, but it had changed in some quality underneath. "Service note is unsigned," Nathan said. "Just a technician ID number." "Marcus?" Olivia said. "I'll find out," Marcus said. "I want that technician in my office by end of day," Olivia said. "And I want Ms. Dunmore's case escalated immediately." She paused. "A woman brings her car in twice with a legitimate complaint, and the resolution note implies she's imagining it because she's anxious about the cost. That is—" She stopped. "That note does not represent how this company handles clients. Find out who wrote it and find out what actually happened with that vehicle." She left. The room was briefly, completely still. Marcus looked at Nathan. "She's not usually that—" "She's right," Nathan said. "The note is inappropriate." He looked at the folder. "And the complaint is probably real. Power delivery inconsistency on a second visit, no fault found. That's consistent with the threshold issue." "You think Ms. Dunmore's case is part of the software pattern?" "I think it's worth treating it that way until we know otherwise," Nathan said. "And I think she's owed a call from someone who takes her seriously." The technical documentation from the software company arrived Thursday morning, which was faster than Nathan had expected, and suggested that either the company had anticipated the request or that their technical director, a thorough woman named Caroline Voss, had recognized the specificity of Olivia's inquiry and understood what it meant. The files were comprehensive: pre-update parameters, post-update parameters, the internal change log from the January release, and a set of field validation reports that the company had conducted before rolling out the update. Nathan forwarded everything to Dennis Park at 7:15 Thursday morning. Dennis called back at 4 in the afternoon. "You're right," Dennis said. Nathan was in his shop, sitting at the side bench with the folder open. Jake was in the far bay working on a transmission. The rain had come back after a 2-day break and was tapping steadily against the metal roof. "Tell me," Nathan said. "The intermittent fault threshold was raised by 18% in the January update," Dennis said. "The field validation was conducted over 6 weeks on 40 vehicles at 2 company-selected facilities. The false positive reduction was confirmed. They got the result they were looking for. But the validation period wasn't long enough to surface the false negative rate for low-amplitude intermittents. Those faults take time to develop. 6 weeks isn't enough. So they validated for the outcome they wanted and didn't run it long enough to find the cost," Nathan said. "That's what the data shows," Dennis said. "I'm not making a judgment call about intent. But the validation period was inadequate for the specific fault category that's causing your problems." "How significant is the threshold shift for the fault types I identified?" "For a classic intermittent low-amplitude signature, something like a degraded bushing, a marginal connector, early-stage component fatigue, the new threshold would miss it in approximately 40% of cases where the old version would have flagged it. That's my estimate based on the parameter shift and the known signature profiles for those fault types." 40%, Nathan said. "Approximately. It's not precise without running the actual fault profiles through both versions, but it's in that range. Can you put that in writing?" A pause. "In what capacity?" "Technically," Nathan said. "Not legally. I'm not building a lawsuit. I need to present this to the company owner and to the software company. I need something that shows the analysis, the basis for the estimate, and your qualifications to make it." Dennis was quiet for a moment. "I'll write it up," he said. "Give me tonight and tomorrow morning." "Thank you," Nathan said. "This is a real problem," Dennis said. "I'd want it fixed." "So would I," Nathan said. He hung up and sat for a moment, listening to the rain on the roof and Jake working on the transmission in the far bay, the regular rhythm of the ratchet, the occasional scrape of metal. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a shop doing what shops did. He called Marcus. "I have the analysis," he said. Dennis confirmed the hypothesis. 40% false negative rate on low-amplitude intermittent faults, post-update. He's writing it up tonight. A silence on Marcus's end that had a particular quality to it. The silence of someone for whom an abstract concern has just become a concrete problem with a specific number attached to it. 40%, Marcus said. "Approximately. Across 9 facilities." "Yes." "We need to be in front of Olivia tomorrow morning," Marcus said. "I know," Nathan said. 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock, Marcus said. Olivia had already called 3 of the 5 waiting clients by the time Friday's meeting happened. She had done it herself, from her desk, in the evenings, not delegating it to Marcus or a client relations manager. The calls had gone the way she'd known they would go, with varying degrees of confusion, frustration, and in one case, a long silence that said more than the words that followed it. The hardest call had been to Patricia Dunmore. Patricia Dunmore was 56, drove a high-specification Italian Grand Tourer that she had purchased as what she later described to Olivia as a completely impractical thing I've always wanted and finally let myself have. She had brought it in twice with a complaint about inconsistent power delivery at low RPM, particularly on cold starts. She had been told twice that the diagnostic results were clean. On the second visit, the service note, written, Marcus had determined, by a technician named Gary Sweeney, who had been with the Westfield facility for 3 years, had described the possibility that the symptom perception was influenced by client anxiety about vehicle value. When Olivia called, Patricia Dunmore was quiet for a long time after Olivia explained why she was calling. "I want to understand something," Patricia finally said. "The note from my second visit. Did the technician actually believe I was imagining it, or was that just a way to close the case?" Olivia didn't hedge. "I think it was a way to close a case that the technician didn't know how to resolve," she said. "That's not an excuse. It's an explanation. It shouldn't have been written that way, and it shouldn't have been written at all." "I'm not an anxious person," Patricia said. "I've owned 6 cars. I know what a power delivery inconsistency feels like." "You were right," Olivia said. "The symptom is real. We have an explanation for why it wasn't detected, and I want you to bring the car back in at your convenience. We will not charge you for the service, and we will not close the case until the fault is resolved." Another silence. What was the explanation for why it wasn't detected? Olivia told her about the software update in plain language. Not the full technical detail, but the substance of it. The threshold change, the false negative risk, what Kensington was doing about it. "So your diagnostic software was telling your technicians nothing was wrong when something was wrong," Patricia said. "In cases meeting certain criteria," Olivia said. "Yes, that's correct." "And how many other clients?" 5 other active cases that we've identified," Olivia said. "I'm calling each of them personally. We may identify more as we complete the audit." Patricia was quiet again. Then, "You didn't have to call me yourself. You could have had someone else do that." "I could have," Olivia said. "Why didn't you?" A pause. "Because the thing that went wrong was partly about whether we took you seriously," Olivia said. "The appropriate response to that is for someone who can actually be responsible to call directly, not a client relations coordinator reading from a script." Patricia Dunmore brought the car in the following Tuesday. Nathan was at the Westfield facility when she arrived, not by arrangement, but because he had driven over to review 2 of the other flagged cases with the service manager. He was in the service corridor when she came through, and he overheard the beginning of the intake conversation in which Steve, Gerald had sent Steve down to assist with the flagged case protocol, explained what they were going to check and why. Patricia was calm, direct, and clearly still carrying some residual frustration, which was reasonable. She listened to Steve's explanation and asked 2 specific questions about the thermal check protocol. Steve answered them without condescension. When she signed the intake form and Steve took the car, she stood for a moment in the service reception area with the particular stillness of someone letting go of something they've been holding. Nathan walked past on his way to the service bay. He didn't know her and had no particular reason to speak to her, but he caught her eye as he passed and he said, because it seemed true, and she looked like she needed to hear it, "They'll find it." She looked at him. "You work here?" "Not exactly," he said. "But you think they'll find it?" "Yes," he said. "They know what they're looking for now." She nodded, once, and went to the waiting room. The Westfield facility's service manager was a woman named Diane Cho, who had been skeptical of Nathan's involvement from the beginning, not aggressively, but with the measured reserve of someone who needed to see results before offering professional respect. She had been at the facility when Marcus had called to explain the software audit, had participated in the protocol review session, and had overseen the thermal check additions to her intake procedure. On the day of Patricia Dunmore's third visit, Diane found Nathan in the service bay, looking at the Italian Grand Tour on the lift. "The power delivery fault," she said. "You think it's the same category as the others?" "Different root cause," Nathan said, "but same diagnostic gap. Low amplitude intermittent." He pointed to a section of the fuel injection system. "I'd look at the injection timing sensor, not the sensor itself, the connector to the sensor. Cold conditions, low RPM. If there's a marginal contact in that connector, it'll introduce a signal delay that the ECU compensates for mostly, but on cold starts, the compensation isn't fully active yet." Diane looked at the connector in question. "That's a standard connector." "It looks standard," Nathan said. "But this model has a modified injection map for the low RPM torque profile, and the connector spec wasn't updated to match the signal frequency of the modified map. It's a manufacturing oversight that the company issued a quiet technical note about 8 months ago. Not a recall, just an advisory." Diane looked at him. "A technical advisory that most service departments probably didn't read." "It was issued as a third-tier advisory," Nathan said, "not flagged for active distribution. It's in the manufacturer's technical database if you search for it specifically." "How do you know about it?" "I read technical advisories," Nathan said, "when I have time." Diane looked at the car for a moment. "You read technical advisories for vehicles you don't service, for manufacturers you don't have a dealer relationship with." "I read everything I can get my hands on," Nathan said. He stopped. "It's just how I stay current. Most people don't work that hard to stay current on things they're not being paid for." Nathan looked at the connector. "I wasn't being paid for any of this when I walked into the Kensington facility on a parts delivery," he said. "I just noticed something." Diane was quiet for a moment, then, "The technical advisory, is it actionable as a repair?" "The connector needs to be replaced with a higher frequency spec part," Nathan said. "It's a 2-hour job. The part is available. It's just not on the standard inventory because the advisory was never flagged for active distribution." Diane looked at her tablet, already adding the part to an order. "I'll get it." Nathan stepped back from the lift and let her technician move in to begin the work. He went to the side bench and wrote in his notepad the part number, the connector specification, the relevant sections of the technical advisory, and tore out the page and set it on the bench where the technician could reference it. He was walking toward the service corridor when Diane said his name. He turned. She was standing at her tablet, the part order on the screen. "I owe you an apology," she said. "When Marcus first explained who you were and why you were involved, She stopped. "I was not particularly welcoming." "I noticed," Nathan said, without rancor. "You've been right 3 times," she said, "or 6 times, depending on how you count." "I've been wrong once that I know of," Nathan said. "One of the 6 cases I flagged in the log, the electrical fault on the British sedan. I thought it was related to the software threshold issue. It wasn't. It was a completely separate fault that had nothing to do with the update. The Hargrove team found it on their own." Diane looked at him. "You're telling me about the one you got wrong." "You'd find out eventually," Nathan said, "and it matters. I'm useful because I catch things others miss, not because I'm infallible. If I stop being honest about the difference, I become another framework with blind spots." Diane held his gaze for a moment. "The part will be here Tuesday," she said. "Good," Nathan said. He went down the corridor. The Friday meeting with Caroline Voss, the software company's technical director, was a video call that lasted an hour and 40 minutes and was, by general agreement afterward, uncomfortable in the specific way that conversations are uncomfortable when everyone in the room knows something needs to change and nobody is completely certain whose responsibility it is. Olivia ran the call from the main facility conference room. Nathan sat beside Marcus. Dennis Park's written analysis was on the screen. Caroline Voss appeared from what looked like an office with a whiteboard behind her covered in notation that Nathan could not read from the camera angle, but which looked like it had been there for a while. Voss had reviewed Dennis's analysis before the call. She had not disputed the methodology. She had not disputed the estimate. She had said, in her opening statement, that the company was taking the findings seriously and would be conducting its own internal review. The validation period for the January update was 6 weeks, Olivia said, 40 minutes into the call. Your own documentation says the update was intended for long-term deployment across high-end service networks. 6 weeks is not a long-term validation. The validation met our standard release criteria, Voss said. She said it carefully, not defensively, the way someone says something true that they know doesn't fully address what's being asked. Your standard release criteria apparently don't account for fault categories with long development timelines, Olivia said. Low-amplitude intermittent faults, the kind that develop over months, not days, won't appear in a 6-week validation. That's a fair criticism, Voss said. It's more than a criticism, Olivia said. I have clients who have been told 3 times over 4 months that nothing is wrong with their vehicles. The reason nothing was found is that your software update raised the detection threshold past the point where it would flag their faults. Voss was quiet for a moment. I understand the impact, she said. I need a corrected parameter set, Olivia said. Not a rollback to the previous version. I understand there were legitimate false positive issues with that version. I need a recalibration that addresses the threshold issue without reintroducing the false positive problem. I need it validated against the fault categories Nathan identified, not just standard release criteria, and I need a timeline. Another silence. 4 weeks, Voss said, to develop and validate. 4 weeks for development and validation, Olivia said. Then another week for deployment, 5 weeks total. Yes, Voss said. That's achievable. I want weekly updates from your technical team directly, Olivia said, not through your sales channel. Technical updates. Voss agreed. After the call ended, the conference room was quiet for a moment. Marcus had 3 pages of notes. Nathan was looking at his own notepad, which had 2 items on it, one circled, one with a question mark. 4 weeks, Marcus said. It's reasonable, Nathan said, if they actually run the validation against the right fault profiles. How do we make sure they do? Nathan looked at his notepad. I can give them the fault signatures from the 6 cases, real-world examples of what the corrected version needs to detect. Dennis can validate their test against those profiles. Will he do that? I'll ask him, Nathan said. I think yes. Olivia gathered her materials. She had not said much in the last 10 minutes of the call and had not said much since it ended. She had the particular quality of stillness that Nathan had come to recognize, not passivity, but a kind of internal processing that preceded decision. Something's still bothering you, Marcus said. She looked at him. 5 weeks before the corrected software is deployed, she said. What happens in the meantime? At all 9 facilities, every client who comes in with an intermittent fault is being evaluated by a diagnostic system with a known gap. We supplement with manual checks, Nathan said. The thermal protocol we added at Hargrove and Westfield. I can write it up as a standard supplement for all 9 facilities, which fault categories trigger the manual check, what the check looks like, how to document it. A formal addendum to the intake protocol. How long to write that up? Give me the weekend, Nathan said. Olivia nodded. She was at the door. She stopped, which he had come to notice she often did at doors. It was where her second thoughts happened. The Patricia Dunmore case, she said. The technician who wrote that note, Gary Sweeney. Yes, Marcus said. What happened with that? He was spoken to, Marcus said carefully. Olivia looked at him. Spoken to? By Diane Cho. Marcus paused. He maintains that the note was not intended to be dismissive, that he was documenting a possibility. The possibility that a client was imagining a fault, Olivia said. Yes. Olivia was quiet. I want him retrained, she said. Not disciplined. Retrained. I want him to sit with Nathan for a day. In the shop, in the field, wherever Nathan is working. I want him to understand what it looks like when someone takes a client's description seriously instead of looking for a reason to dismiss it. She looked at Nathan. Is that something you can do? Nathan looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. Good. She opened the door. Write up the supplement protocol this weekend. Send it to Marcus by Sunday night. I want it at all 9 facilities by Wednesday. She left. Marcus looked at Nathan. She's doing this fast, Nathan said. It was not quite a question. She always does things fast once she knows what needs to be done, Marcus said. The hesitation is in the diagnosis. Once the problem is clear, she moves. He gathered his notes. You'll notice she doesn't say thank you very much. I noticed, Nathan said. That's not because she isn't grateful, Marcus said. It's because she treats you like a professional. Gratitude is for favors. She's paying you for work, and she respects the work. That's how she shows it. Nathan thought about this. That's fine, he said. I don't need the thank you. No, Marcus said. I didn't think you did. Nathan looked out the window at the service yard below. The rain had stopped sometime during the call. The yard was wet and reflected the late afternoon light in long, irregular patches. A technician was moving a car toward the rear bay, slowly, deliberately. He thought about Gary Sweeney, a technician who had written a note that dismissed a client's experience, not out of cruelty. Nathan didn't think it was out of cruelty, but out of the particular frustration of someone who had run out of diagnostic answers and needed the case to be closed. It was a human failure, not a professional one. The professional failure was that the system had allowed it, that there was no checkpoint between the technician's frustration and the service note that went into a client's permanent file. He thought about Patricia Dunmore, sitting in the waiting room with the residual weight of having been dismissed, letting it go, slowly. He thought about the supplement protocol he needed to write this weekend. 12 pages, probably. Specific, actionable, built around the fault categories he had identified. Something that any technician at any of the 9 facilities could pick up and use without additional training, because the best protocols were the ones that didn't require exceptional people to execute them. He picked up his notepad and wrote the first line of the outline. Outside, the wet surface of the service yard caught the last of the afternoon light and held it for a moment, briefly, unevenly, in the way wet things caught light, before the cloud shifted and it was gone. The supplement protocol landed in Marcus's inbox at 11:14 on Sunday night. It was 14 pages. Nathan had written it at his kitchen table over the course of Saturday afternoon and Sunday, stopping once to drive to the shop and check a reference in the manufacturer documentation he kept in the filing cabinet, stopping again to call Dennis Park with a question about the signal frequency parameters for the injection timing fault category. The writing itself was not difficult. He had been doing this kind of documentation for years, for his own shop, for his own records that nobody read but him. The discipline of writing clearly about technical things was something he had developed early, because he had learned young that you didn't actually understand something until you could explain it to someone who didn't already know it. Marcus read it Monday morning and forwarded it to Olivia with one line. Supplement protocol from NB. Ready for distribution. Olivia read it before her 8 o'clock and called Nathan at 8:15. Page 9, she said, the section on client intake language. Yes, Nathan said. He was in the truck, 20 minutes from Elmwood, driving back from a parts pickup. This wasn't in the scope I gave you, she said. No, he said, but it was in the problem. The section on page 9 was half a page, and it addressed something Nathan had not been asked to address, but had not been able to leave out. It was about how technicians documented client symptom descriptions when they couldn't reproduce or detect the fault. It said, in plain language, a client's inability to demonstrate a fault during a service visit does not constitute evidence that the fault does not exist. Intermittent faults, by definition, require specific conditions to manifest. When a client's description is consistent across multiple visits, the appropriate service note documents the description accurately and records what was checked and not found, not a judgment about the client's perception. It also said, the phrase "no fault found" is a diagnostic conclusion, not a statement about the vehicle's condition. These are different things. Technicians are encouraged to use the phrase "fault not detected under current test conditions" when the symptom has not been reproduced. The language distinction in the last paragraph, Olivia said. No fault found versus fault not detected under current test conditions. It matters, Nathan said. One closes the case, the other keeps it open. A silence on her end. How many service departments do you think currently use the first phrase when they should use the second? She asked. Most of them, Nathan said. Not out of bad intent, because no fault found is what the diagnostic report generates automatically. The technician copies it into the service note without thinking about what it actually says to the client. That's a software and training problem, Olivia said. Yes, Nathan said. Both. I'm adding this section to the standard service documentation training, she said, not just for the 9 facilities, For all 14. Nathan said nothing for a moment. He was on the highway, the early morning sun just beginning to clear the tree line to his right, the road still damp from the previous night's rain. "Okay," he said. "You sound surprised," Olivia said. "I am a little," he said. "Most companies make changes where the problem is. You're making the change everywhere." "The problem exists everywhere," she said. "We just found it in 9 places. That doesn't mean the other 5 are clean." Nathan nodded to himself in the truck cab. "That's good thinking." "It's obvious thinking," she said. "Once someone shows you the shape of the problem." She paused. "The protocol goes to all 14 facilities Wednesday. I want a review session at the end of the month. All service managers on a call. To go over the implementation. Can you be on that call?" "Yes," he said. "Good, that's all." She hung up. Nathan drove the last 15 minutes to Elmwood with the early sun in his eyes and the radio off, thinking about page 9. Gary Sweeney arrived at Brooks Auto Repair on a Thursday morning in the second week of May, which was 8 days after Olivia had proposed the idea, and 6 days after Diane Cho had delivered the news to Sweeney that he would be spending a day with the consulting technician. Sweeney was 31, medium build, with the contained expression of a man who had been told to do something he wasn't sure he deserved and wasn't sure how to feel about. He drove his own car, not a company vehicle. He parked in the lot across from the shop, sat for a moment, and then got out and crossed the street. Nathan was under the hood of a 9-year-old import sedan when Sweeney came in. He heard the door and looked up and said, "Give me 5 minutes," and went back to what he was doing. Sweeney stood near the entrance and looked around the shop. He had expected, Nathan sensed when he eventually looked at him directly, something more. More equipment, more size, more of whatever it was that justified the reputation. What he found was a clean 2-bay garage that was organized with a precision that wasn't immediately obvious but revealed itself the longer you were in it. Nothing was where it shouldn't be. Everything had a place, and the place made sense. When Nathan finished with the hood, he wiped his hands and walked over. "Nathan Brooks," he said. "Gary Sweeney." They shook hands. Sweeney met his eyes without difficulty, which Nathan registered. Not defensive, not performing contrition, just present. "You know why you're here," Nathan said. "Diane told me," Sweeney said. "What did she tell you?" "That I wrote a service note that was inappropriate and that I'm here to understand why." Nathan looked at him for a moment. "Do you know why it was inappropriate?" Sweeney was quiet. "I wrote that the client's perception might be influenced by anxiety," he said. "I meant it as I was trying to document a possibility that sometimes clients amplify symptoms when they're nervous about expensive repairs. Is that something you believe?" "Sometimes," Sweeney said. "It happens." "It does happen," Nathan said. "And when it happens, how do you document it?" Sweeney didn't answer immediately. "I document what I found and didn't find," he said slowly. "And then He stopped. "I wrote something that went beyond what I found." "You wrote something about her," Nathan said. "Not about the car." Sweeney looked at the floor for a moment. "Yes." "She was right," Nathan said. "The fault was real. We found it." He paused. "But here's the thing. Even if she had been wrong, even if the car had been completely clean and the symptom had been in her head, you still don't write that note because you don't have the information to write it. You're not a psychologist, and she didn't ask for your assessment of her mental state. She asked you to find the problem with her car." Sweeney looked at him. His expression had shifted. Not wounded, but working. "When you can't find the fault," Nathan continued, "the note says what you checked and didn't find. It says the symptom hasn't been reproduced under current test conditions. It doesn't say anything about the client, because the case isn't closed just because you ran out of tools." "I ran out of tools," Sweeney said quietly. "Yes," Nathan said. "That's not a failure. That happens. The failure is what you wrote when you got there." He paused. "Come over here." He walked to the side bench and set down the morning's first job, a fuel pressure diagnostic on a mid-range domestic sedan. He talked Sweeney through the setup, not lecturing, working, and explaining as he worked, the way Nathan's uncle had done with him in the backyard 30 years ago when they'd taken apart an engine that Nathan had been afraid to touch. They worked through the morning, Nathan let Sweeney handle the instruments, guided him on the diagnostic sequence, corrected him once when he moved too quickly to a conclusion based on an initial reading. "Read it again," Nathan said. "Wait for the cycle." Sweeney read it again, waited, and got a different number. "That's the real reading," Nathan said. "It looked right the first time," Sweeney said. "It looked like it was going to be right," Nathan said. "There's a difference." By noon, they had finished 2 jobs. Sweeney was more relaxed than he had been at 9 o'clock, in the way people became relaxed when they were working with their hands and the work was going well. They ate lunch at the side bench. Nathan had a sandwich from the deli 2 blocks away. Sweeney had brought his own. And the conversation shifted, not to the service note or Patricia Dunmore, but to a brake job that Sweeney had done the previous week that hadn't sat right with him afterward, where the pedal feel was slightly different from what he'd expected. Nathan asked him specific questions. Sweeney answered them. After a few minutes, Nathan said, "Did you check the master cylinder pressure at full application?" "No," Sweeney said. "The results were within spec." "Within spec isn't the same as right," Nathan said. "If the pedal feel changed after the job, there's something in the system that's different. Check the master cylinder pressure and compare it to the pre-job spec if you have it." Sweeney wrote this in his own notepad. In the afternoon, a client came in. A man named Theo, who drove a vintage European sports car that he maintained with the passionate attention of someone who had owned it for 20 years and intended to own it for 20 more. The car had an intermittent starting hesitation that came and went without obvious pattern. Theo had described it twice, and Nathan had found nothing on the first visit, which he had told Theo honestly, along with a specific description of what he had checked and why those checks hadn't resolved it. Today was the 3rd visit. Sweeney watched Nathan's intake process with Theo. He watched Nathan listen. Actually listen, without looking at the diagnostic tablet, without preparing his next question while Theo was still answering the previous one. He watched Nathan ask Theo to describe the hesitation in physical terms. Not technical, physical. What did it feel like? How long did it last? What was he doing when it happened? Theo said, "It's like the car forgets what it's supposed to do for about half a second, like it loses confidence." Nathan wrote that down. Loses confidence. Half second. First start of the day or later? Both. But it's worse in the morning. How long does it take to warm up to normal? About 8 minutes, Nathan wrote. He spent 20 minutes with Theo before going near the car. Sweeney watched all of it. After Theo left the car and went to wait, Sweeney said, "You wrote down loses confidence." "Yes," Nathan said. "That's not a technical description." "No," Nathan said. "It's how he experiences it. And how someone experiences a symptom tells you something about the symptom that the technical description sometimes doesn't. A half-second hesitation that feels like losing confidence is different from a half-second hesitation that feels like a stumble. Different sensation, different likely cause. You can tell the cause from how it feels to the driver?" "Not always," Nathan said, but it narrows the field." He looked at the car. "This one I think is the cold start enrichment cycle. There's a point in the warm-up where the cycle transitions, and on this model, with this age and mileage, the transition can stutter. It's not on any fault code because it's not a failure. It's a calibration drift." "Is that in the diagnostic database?" "No," Nathan said. "It's in a technical discussion thread from a forum for enthusiasts of this model. Someone posted about it 6 years ago, and a factory engineer responded in the thread." He paused. "I have it bookmarked." Sweeney stared at him. "You have a forum thread bookmarked?" "I have about 300 forum threads bookmarked," Nathan said, "for various models. The diagnostic databases are good for common faults. Rare faults live on forums." He picked up his flashlight. "Come look at this." Sweeney left at 4:30. He stood at the door of the shop for a moment, keys in his hand, and looked back at Nathan, who was at the bench writing up the day's records. "The Patricia Dunmore note," Sweeney said. Nathan looked up. "I'm sorry I wrote it," Sweeney said. "Not because I got in trouble for it, because it was wrong." He paused. "She was right about her car, and I told her, essentially, that she was the problem. That's not what I'm supposed to be doing." But Nathan set down his pen. "No," he said. "I think I was—" Sweeney stopped. assembled the thought. I think I was frustrated, not at her specifically, at the situation, at not having the answer. And when you're frustrated and you don't have the answer, sometimes you look for a way to make the problem someone else's. Yes, Nathan said. That's not a good enough reason. No, Nathan said. But it's the real one, and knowing the real reason is where you start. He held the man's gaze. You won't do it again. It wasn't a question. Sweeney shook his head. No. He left. Nathan sat for a moment in the empty shop. Then he wrote up the last record of the day, filed it, and went to lock the side door. Poisson. The end-of-month review call happened on a Friday afternoon and included all 14 service managers, Marcus, Olivia, and Nathan, who joined from his shop on a laptop propped against the filing cabinet. It was not a comfortable call in the way that productive calls often weren't. It surfaced disagreements about implementation, resistance from two facility managers who felt the new intake protocol added time without clear benefit, and a debate about the language distinction between no fault found and fault not detected under current test conditions that ran longer than it should have because the underlying disagreement wasn't really about the language. Nathan spoke 3 times. He kept each contribution brief. The first was a clarification of the thermal check procedure for a manager who had misunderstood which fault categories triggered it. The second was a response to the manager who felt the protocol added time. It adds 12 minutes to an intake for a specific category of complaint. If the alternative is 3 return visits that don't resolve the fault, 12 minutes is inexpensive. Begrijpt u mijn pad? The third was at the end of the call, when Olivia asked if he had anything else. He said, "The protocol is a tool. It's not a replacement for judgment. If a technician is in a situation the protocol doesn't cover, the question to ask is, have I looked at the object or have I looked at the test result? The test result tells you what the framework found. The object tells you what's actually there. Start with the object." The call ended 20 minutes later. 3 managers followed up with Marcus by email within the hour. One of the emails said the last point Nathan made should be in the onboarding training. Marcus forwarded it to Olivia. Olivia read it and wrote back, "Agreed. Ask Nathan to write it up." Caroline Voss delivered the recalibrated parameter set at the end of week 5, which was exactly when she had said she would, and which Nathan noted because in his experience, deadline adherence was a form of professional communication that said more about an organization than most people acknowledged. Dennis Park ran the validation against the 6 fault signature profiles Nathan had provided and confirmed the corrected version detected all 6. He also found that the false positive rate had been brought down to a level lower than both the original version and the overcorrected January update, which was the result that no one had been certain was achievable and that everyone had wanted. Dennis sent Nathan the validation report with a 1-line note. They actually did the work. Pass it on. Nathan passed it on to Marcus, who passed it to Olivia. The corrected software was deployed across all 9 affected facilities over the following week. The deployment was documented by Marcus in a memo that went to the facility managers and included, at Olivia's instruction, a full explanation of what the January update had changed, what the recalibrated version addressed, and why the gap had occurred. The memo did not minimize the impact. It described the problem, the investigation, and the solution in factual language that gave the managers everything they needed to explain it to their staff. Nathan read the memo when Marcus sent him a copy. It was clear, accurate, and took responsibility without being defensive or performative about it. He read it twice and thought about the difference between organizations that wrote memos like this and organizations that didn't, and what that difference actually meant for the people working inside them and the clients they served. The last of the 6 flagged cases resolved 3 weeks after the software deployment. It was a fault at the Lakeside facility, a handling complaint from a client who had been waiting 4 months, the longest of any of them. The corrected software flagged a marginal active stabilizer control signal on the first diagnostic sweep under the new parameters, which led the technician to the physical component, which showed early-stage actuator degradation. The repair took 2 hours. The client, a man named Curtis Alderman, who had been patient in the way that people were patient when they had no other option, called Gerald Pruitt after he picked up the car and drove it home. Gerald called Marcus. "He says it's fixed," Gerald said. "He also says And I'm quoting, "Tell whoever figured it out that I wasn't losing my mind." Marcus wrote this down and sent it to Olivia, who sent it to Nathan with no additional comment. Nathan read it in the shop on a Tuesday afternoon between a wheel bearing replacement and a cooling system flush. He read it twice. Then he set his phone down and went back to work. 6 weeks after the supplement protocol had gone to all 14 facilities, Olivia drove to Elmwood. She had not told Nathan she was coming. She had told Marcus she was taking the afternoon for a site visit, which was technically accurate in that she was visiting a location in the network, though Brooks Auto Repair was not in any formal sense part of the network and never would be. She drove herself, a thing she did more often than people realized, particularly when she was thinking about something that required uninterrupted quiet. She pulled into the lot across from the shop at 2 in the afternoon. The street was ordinary. Dry cleaner, hardware store, a lunch place with a hand-painted sign. The kind of street that existed in 100 towns and that you passed through without remembering you'd passed through it. She crossed the street and went in. Nathan was at the bench, working on something she couldn't immediately identify. A compact assembly of components that he had spread across a clean cloth, each piece set down with the deliberate order of someone who intended to put them back together in reverse sequence. He looked up when she came in. He didn't look surprised exactly. He looked the way he usually looked, attentive, waiting to understand the situation before responding to it. "Ms. Kensington," he said. "Olivia," she said. "We've been working together for 3 months." "Olivia," he said. He set down the component in his hand. "Is something wrong?" "No," she said. She looked around the shop, the organized bays, the labeled inventory, the project car in the far corner under its fitted cover, the filing cabinet that she suspected contained records going back years. "Everything is actually going well. That's partly why I came." He looked at her. She pulled a stool from the side bench and sat down, which surprised him slightly. She had the look of a woman who was comfortable in boardrooms and conference rooms, but less accustomed to sitting on a stool in a working garage. She sat on it without ceremony. "The Valerian Apex is at the main facility," she said. "I drove it yesterday. It's running well. It's been running well since the day you fixed it." "Good," he said. "I also drove it the week before that, and the week before that," she said. "I drive it about once a week now. I didn't used to. Before the problem, I drove it maybe once a month. Kept it for occasions." She paused. "Now I drive it regularly, which is, I realize, what you're supposed to do with a car you love." Nathan said nothing, but there was something in his expression that was the closest thing to warmth she had seen from him. "I want to talk about the arrangement," she said. "What about it?" "It's been 3 months, 6 cases closed, the software issue found and corrected, the protocol distributed, the training updated." She folded her hands in her lap. "What I offered you in February was a retainer for difficult cases. What you've actually done is closer to a systematic diagnostic audit of the entire network." "I followed the problems where they went," Nathan said. "I know," she said. "I'm not complaining. I'm trying to understand what this arrangement actually is, because what it started as and what it became are different things." She looked at him. "I want to formalize what it's actually become. Not just difficult individual cases, a standing relationship with the network, protocol development, ongoing audit, direct access to any facility, an annual review of diagnostic coverage gaps across the group." Nathan looked at the components spread on the cloth in front of him. He was quiet for a moment. "I have the shop," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm not asking for your time in a way that changes what you do here. I'm asking for a more formal version of what's already happening." "What's already happening is that I'm available when something needs looking at," he said. "What I'm describing is that you're also available to look at the things nobody's noticed yet," she said. "Proactively, not just reactively." She paused. "The software threshold issue. You found it in a case log on your own time because you read through 31 pages of service history looking for patterns. That kind of work isn't what I hired you for, but it's the most valuable thing you did." Nathan looked at her. "You're asking me to keep doing that." "I'm asking you to make it official," she said. "So you're compensated for it, and so you have the access you need to do it properly." He was quiet for a moment, What does proper access mean? He said. Full technical documentation for every vehicle in the network inventory. Direct contact with every service manager, not through Marcus. Manufacturer technical database access for all 14 brands we carry. She paused. And the latitude to flag things to me directly when you think something is a network-wide issue rather than a single facility problem. The software threshold issue was a network-wide problem that nobody knew was a network-wide problem, Nathan said. Yes, Olivia said. That's why I'm here. He picked up the component from the cloth, turned it over in his hands, and set it back down. It was a small piece of machined aluminum, a valve body component from something she couldn't identify, worn smooth on one surface in the specific way that things wore when they had been doing their job correctly for a long time. I want to keep the shop hours flexible, he said. When I'm here, I'm here. The consulting work happens around it, not instead of it. Agreed, she said. And I want to be honest with you when I think something is wrong with the way a facility is operating, not just the diagnostic process. If I see something in how a client is being treated that concerns me, I want to be able to say so. She looked at him. Is this about Gary Sweeney? It's about Gary Sweeney being one example of something that probably exists at other facilities too, he said. When technicians get frustrated, they sometimes document their frustration instead of the fault. I've seen it in the log. It's not malicious, but it's a systemic pattern, and patterns need to be named before they can be changed. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Name them to me, she said, directly. I will, he said. She nodded. She stood and looked around the shop one more time, the organized simplicity of it, the absence of anything unnecessary, the kind of space that told you something exact about the person who worked in it. One more thing, she said. Yes. The project car in the corner. She nodded toward the covered shape in the far bay. What is it? Nathan looked at it. 71 Torrance 5-8. I've been working on it for 2 years. What's wrong with it? Nothing's wrong with it, he said. I'm rebuilding it from the bottom up, taking it apart and understanding every system before putting it back. Not because it needs it, because I want to understand it completely. Olivia looked at the covered car for a moment. And when you're done? I'll drive it, he said, and I'll know exactly how it works. She looked at him. That's what you do with everything, isn't it? She said. It was not quite a question. He thought about it honestly. I don't like not understanding things, he said. When something exists and does something and I don't know how it does it, that bothers me. It's not ambition. It's just a need to know how things work from the inside. That's a rare thing, Olivia said. It's not rare, Nathan said. There are a lot of people who work that way. They're just not always in the visible places. She looked at him for a moment longer. No, she said, they're not. She offered her hand. He shook it. The same brief, direct handshake as their first meeting, months ago, in the service bay when a covered car had just come back to life, and the room had been full of people who hadn't known what to make of the moment. She went out through the door and crossed the street to her car. Nathan stood at the bench for a moment after she left. Then he sat down and picked up the valve body component and looked at it. He thought about a thing that was true and that he had never quite put into words, even to himself. It was this. Most people, when they encountered something they didn't understand, felt unsettled by the not understanding. They wanted the answer quickly, wanted the discomfort resolved, wanted the case closed so they could move on. That was a reasonable way to feel. It was a human way to feel, but he had always felt something different. When he encountered something he didn't understand, he felt a kind of attention sharpen in him. Not urgency, but focus. The specific quality of a mind that had found the thing it was built for. The not understanding was not a problem to escape. It was a place to begin. He thought about the Valerian Apex, sitting in a service bay for 8 days while 14 specialists ran tests and found nothing. He thought about the dust cover with its quarter-inch gap and the panel compression that he'd noticed because he happened to be standing at the right angle in the right light. He thought about the 0.5 millimeter in the connector housing. Not a dramatic fault, not a catastrophic failure, just a small thing that was not quite what it was supposed to be, producing an absence that nobody could explain. He thought about what Olivia had said, the visible places. There was a whole category of knowledge that existed outside the visible places. It lived in technical forum threads and engineering symposia documents, and the second-tier advisory notes that never got distributed, and the observations of people who worked with their hands in small shops in towns that most people drove through without stopping. That knowledge was not lesser. It was often more specific, more earned, more directly connected to the actual behavior of actual machines under actual conditions than the knowledge that came from expensive equipment and credentialed expertise. It was just quieter. He set the valve body component down and looked at the spread of pieces on the cloth. Each one had a purpose, a position, a relationship to the pieces around it that had been designed by someone who understood the whole. When the assembly was together, the individual pieces were invisible. The only way to understand them was to take the thing apart. He had always known this. He had never been able to explain it well to people who hadn't spent time with their hands inside machines, trying to see what the outside didn't show. He picked up the next component. Outside, through the shop's side window, the afternoon was ordinary and bright. A car passed on the street. The dry cleaner's sign caught the light for a moment. The hardware store was quiet. Elmwood was what it always was, a town of modest streets and working people and the specific unheroic dignity of a place that kept going without asking to be noticed. Nathan set the component in its position on the cloth and looked at the growing pattern of disassembly, each piece in its correct place, waiting to be understood before it was put back. He was not famous. He was not going to be famous. He did not want to be. What he wanted was exactly what he had: the work, the understanding, the specific satisfaction of finding the thing that was hidden inside the thing that appeared to be working correctly. The satisfaction of being the person who could look at what everyone else had looked at and see what they had missed, not because he was exceptional, but because he had paid the kind of attention that could not be manufactured and could not be rushed and could not be purchased with equipment alone. He had learned this from his uncle in a backyard with an engine that everyone else thought was too old to be worth understanding. He had spent 20 years learning it more completely. He would spend the rest of his working life learning it still. The Valerian Apex was on the road. The Hessler's suspension tracked clean through left-hand curves. Patricia Dunmore's car started without hesitation in the cold. Curtis Alderman drove home and was not losing his mind. 9 service facilities ran a diagnostic protocol that included 12 more minutes and 2 additional checks and caught things that had previously gone undetected. 14 service managers had a document that changed in 4 sentences how they were supposed to talk about what they hadn't found. And in a small shop in Elmwood, on an ordinary afternoon in late spring, a mechanic sat at a bench and took apart a machine he already knew how to fix piece by piece, just to understand it better. This was the work. This was enough.